Welcome back, guys, to Horror Valley. In today's episode, I'm sharing 12 true, terrifying stories about Halloween nights that went horrifyingly wrong. These tales remind us some traditions are better left in the dark. But before we begin, please consider subscribing and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Let me know where you're tuning in from. Thank you all. Now, let's start. I heard my own name come out of a doorbell on Halloween night. It didn't sound robotic or glitchy. It sounded like my mother calling me in for dinner when I was 8, soft and a little annoyed. The first time I heard it, I laughed, because I thought some neighbor installed a prank speaker. The second time, I knew it wasn't a prank. I was walking my niece and her 2 friends around the neighborhood, hanging back with a coffee, keeping an eye on their plastic pumpkins. The street was loud with music and fake screams, and every porch smelled like damp leaves and the burnt sugar of candles tucked inside pumpkins. Most houses were normal. This one sat at the end of a short walkway with a sagging roof and an orange porch light that didn't flicker. It didn't even look like it was coming from a bulb. The glow felt like a steady flame. A plastic bowl sat on a small table by the door, a handwritten sign taped to it. The letters were neat and curved like a schoolteacher's. It said, "Take one, be honest." The bowl was empty. I could see a few sugar crystals stuck in the bottom. Through the pebbled glass of the door, there was no movement, just shadow and a deeper shade of orange. My niece tugged my sleeve. "Are you coming, or are you going to text the whole night?" she said, rolling her eyes for her friends. I told her to hit the next house and I'd catch up. I wanted to hit the bell just for the satisfying ding. The button was old brass, dark around the edges from 100 fingers. When I reached out, the metal felt warm. The chime that rang out didn't come from inside the house. It felt like it came from behind the door and from right behind my ear at the same time. It made my skin tighten. Right after, my mother's voice slipped through the speaker grill. The same voice I heard 100 times as a kid. It said my name. It said it right, with the same rhythm she used when she was tired. I stepped back and laughed again, weak. "Okay, that's creepy," I said, even though nobody was there to hear me. Down the sidewalk, the girls had reached the neighbor's porch. My friend Jamie, who'd joined us later, turned and raised his eyebrows. "You good?" he called. I gave him a thumbs up. It was easier than shouting, I guess. Then the doorbell spoke again. This time it wasn't my mother. It was my grandfather, who has been dead for 5 years. He always called me by a nickname I hated, and I hadn't heard it out loud since his funeral. I froze with my hand halfway out, barely breathing. The voice had weight to it. It didn't sound recorded. It felt like breath passing through metal. I told myself there were apps for this. People did smart doorbell tricks all the time. Maybe a camera read lips or a phone's Bluetooth gave it my name. I'm not tech dumb, but I'm not that smart either. I bent closer to look for a lens. There was a hairline crack in the brass plate, a fine dark line, and under the plate, I saw something pale, not wire. Skin, of all things, was the first word that came to mind. I wanted to leave. I really did. I turned to follow the kids, and the bell whispered behind me. It said, "Don't turn your back." It didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a pout. The porch seemed to breathe then, wood taking and giving air. A slow exhale that made a candle twitch inside a pumpkin on the steps. The smell shifted. Under the wax was a sour sweetness, like fruit left in a hot car. In the bowl, I noticed a single wrapped candy hiding along the rim, like it had slid there to avoid being seen. It was wrapped in cellophane that was cloudy with age. Someone had written my first name on it in ballpoint pen. The letters were shaky and familiar. A tiny strand of hair was trapped under the twist of the wrapper, flattened there by heat. I didn't know why, but it made my stomach roll. I didn't take it. I reached for the doorbell again because I wanted to prove something to myself. Up close, the metal hummed. It wasn't an electric hum. It was a throat. The cut wires behind the housing were easy to see through a missing screw hole. They were dead, snipped and curled like dried veins. I pressed the button anyway. The orange light behind the glass deepened, like a breath drawn and held. The bell didn't chime the same way this time. It made a soft sound like someone touching a glass rim. Then my own voice came through the grill. It said my name in my exact tone, like a nightmare where you hear yourself speaking from across the room. I swallowed and felt my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth. The walkway behind me felt longer than it should. I could still see my niece, but she looked farther, like I was viewing her down a tunnel. I took out my phone to take a photo. The screen flashed with gray bands, and the battery jumped down 20% in one blink. A text arrived from an unknown number with no contact name. It said, "Don't let it ring 3 times." I tried to count the chimes I'd already made, once for the first voice, once for the second. That was 2. My thumb hovered. I thought if I just walked away, it would be fine. The bell made a soft, bright tone on its own, a whisper of metal. The speaker said, 2, in a child's voice I didn't recognize. I slapped my palm over the button to stop it, and my skin stuck. It felt like I'd laid my hand on an animal, warmth pressed back from the plate, and I swear I felt a mouth under there, wet air seeping through the seams. The orange light went dull, as if something inside the house moved between the glow and the glass. A slow tick began, deeper than a chime. It was like a heartbeat you feel through a wall. My hand shook and I tried to peel my skin away, but the brass pulled at me, a sticky, patient suction. I heard footsteps inside, but the rhythm was wrong, heel lifting before toe, a backward walk coming toward the door. The tick rose to a tone that hurt my teeth. Something on the other side leaned against the door. The speaker grill cooled, and I felt a cold line trace my palm from wrist to thumb, as if a tongue had marked where to cut. The tone peaked and the bell whispered, 3, like a promise. The latch inside clicked. The door began to open, slow, as if whoever held it was listening to my breath and savoring it. When the gap widened enough for the dark to spill out like smoke, a shape leaned into the crack, and it used my voice again. It said, "Come in." I didn't move. The gap was no wider than my thumb, a thin orange slice and a cold slip of air, and my own voice came from it again. It said it softer, like an inside joke. It said, "Come in." My palm was still stuck to the brass. The plate was warm and damp, and something under it flexed against my skin, like a slow swallow I could feel in my bones. I tried to call Jamie. My throat worked, but the sound didn't come out of my mouth. It came from the speaker grill under my hand. The doorbell spoke for me. It said, "Jamie." And it said it in my voice, with the exact way I say his name when I want help, but don't need to want to sound scared. The footsteps inside were closer, wrong rhythm, toe dragging like a backward walk. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. The screen showed the same unknown number. The text said, "Don't let it breathe." The words made no sense to me and made perfect sense at the same time. I pressed my palm harder into the metal. I felt a shape under the plate change, like a lip trying to pull in air that I was blocking. The orange light dimmed. A low hum started, not electric, a throat unhappy. The edges of the plate bit at me. A fine ridge pressed into the meat of my hand, like a tiny tooth pushing up from behind metal. My eyes went to the bowl without meaning to. The candy with my name still sat there, tucked along the rim like it wanted to hide. I used my free hand to grab it. The wrapper was slick with a film, and the hair under the twist stuck to my finger. I tore it open with my teeth. The candy wasn't a normal shape. It was a small, clear bell made of hard sugar with a dark grain inside, like a seed or a scab. Heat had softened it. It gave under my thumb. I pushed it into the speaker grill. It stuck. The voices that lived there groaned at once. My mother's voice, my grandfather's voice, a voice that was just breath, all pushed against the sugar like it was a membrane. The door pressed in from the other side, steady and patient, like a chest leaning on the wood to listen. The latch scraped a little more. I pulled at my hand with a jerk. The plate held me like chewing gum. When I tore free, it hurt in a small, sharp way that made my eyes water. The outline of the plate was stamped on my palm, dark and wet, a red oval with thin ridges like a print. The door snapped back an inch as if disappointed. The crack closed to a line. My knees went weak, and I slid down the siding, leaving a smear on the paint. The candy in the grill trembled and whined like glass under heat. Down the sidewalk, my niece turned. She heard my voice again, but this time it wasn't mine. The bell called her name with my exact cadence. She took a step toward me without thinking. I found my voice, and it came from my throat this time. I said, "Stay on the sidewalk." My words scratched my throat like I'd swallowed dust. Jamie jogged up, eyes on my dripping hand. He reached for the button before I could say anything, like he wanted to ring for help. I grabbed his wrist. I told him not to touch it. The bowl rattled on the little table like a pot on a burner. The house breathed out then, a long warm exhale that smelled like old sugar and sink drains. The thin orange glow behind the glass fluttered as if something had stepped away. In the faint reflection, I saw shapes layered on shapes, faces pressed behind pebbled glass. A little kid face sucked flat, an old face with a long mouth, a face that looked too much like mine, eyes closed as if listening. The candy in the grill shivered. The house whispered our names in a string and then went still. We left without arguing. I tucked my niece under my arm and told the kids no more houses on that side of the street. Jamie kept turning back like he thought someone would follow. Behind us, the doorbell rang again on its own. It made a small bell tone, muffled by sugar. The speaker said, "2," in a voice that wasn't a voice, just breath pushed into shape. The third ring did not come. I did not let it. At the corner, I checked my phone. The unknown number had sent 3 messages in a row. It said, "Keep moving." It said, "Do not answer it." It said, "If it knows your name, it will know your breath." I tried to call the number. My own voicemail answered. Hearing myself say my greeting in that thin tone made my stomach drop. I hung up fast and put the phone on airplane mode without thinking why. At home, I washed my hand. The red oval didn't wash away. It looked like a kiss, or a burn, or a mouth print. My niece slept on the couch, clutching her pumpkin. I sat in a chair and stared at the door until my eyes stung. Around 2, I heard a single chime on the street, far away, as if it had followed us down the block and just wanted me to know. The next morning, I drove back alone in daylight. The address was there, but the house was not. A temporary orange fence boxed in a patch of dirt and weeds. A sign on a post said the lot was under review. The sidewalk still had a short walkway that ended at the fence like a joke. On the fence hung a scrap of paper taped up rough. The handwriting was neat and curved. It said, "Take 1." At the base of the fence, half hidden in grass, lay a single wrapped candy with my name on it. That night, I walked my niece to her room and turned off the hall light. She blinked at me and asked why I called her from that porch in a mean way. I told her it wasn't me. I told her if she ever hears my voice and can't see my face, she should not answer. She nodded, serious. I went back to the living room and sat down. The apartment was quiet in that thick way old buildings get after midnight. My doorbell is not fancy. It's a cheap plastic button with a weak yellow bulb. I switched the power off, just in case. Around 3, the little bulb glowed on anyway with a thin orange tint. A gentle ding sounded, soft as glass touched with a wet finger. My phone lit up on the table. A text came in from the same unknown number. It said, 2. Before I could type, another text came in from a contact name that made my stomach turn. It was my own number. It said, "Don't let it ring 3 times." The bell made one bright tone all by itself. The speaker in the hall crackled. My mother's voice slipped through it, close and tired, and then my voice layered in under hers like a second track. The 2 of us said the same words at once. We said, "Come in." I am still in this apartment. The power to the bell is still off. I am still waiting for the 3rd ring. I noticed the house was breathing the first time I opened the door for trick-or-treaters. It was a long, wet sigh that pushed at my face and moved the little witch's hair on the porch. I laughed because I thought it was the furnace kicking on, even though the thermostat was set to off. The kids grabbed candy and ran, and when I closed the door, the house drew a long, slow inhale. The wood under my feet lifted a little, like a chest. I was house-sitting for my neighbor, Marla. She had left town at the last minute to care for her sister and begged me to hand out candy because her street gets swarmed every year. She taped a note by the kitchen sink in neat square letters. It said, "Please crack the kitchen window or it gets stuffy. Take the bowl by the door. Thank you." I cracked the kitchen window a couple inches and heard the same slow in and out sound from the vents. It wasn't a motor sound. It was softer, a whisper through teeth. The curtains swayed like they were on a weak tide. The smell that rode the airflow was sweet and sour at the same time, like someone left fruit under a radiator. The doorbell rang again. 3 kids in face paint stood shoulder to shoulder, looking past me with that suspicious kid look. I held out the bowl. They each grabbed 2, even though the sign said 1. Their fingers paused in the candy like they felt something warm. They said thank you and stepped back into the cold. As I pushed the door toward the frame, I felt a gentle push back, like the air did not want to be trapped. The weather strip whistled. Then the seal closed, and there was the inhale again. Longer this time. My hair lifted at my neck. I went to the thermostat in the hall. It was an old plastic dial set to off. I tapped the cover with my knuckle and heard the breathing through the walls, not the ducts. It went through the studs and the plaster. It had a rhythm. Inhale for 7, hold for 2, exhale for 6. I timed it on my phone because that made me feel normal. Numbers make things normal. The bowl felt warm in my hands when I picked it up to refill. The wrappers had a soft damp to them, like breath had fogged the plastic. My fingers smelled like sugar that had been in someone's mouth. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and frowned at myself because I knew how that sounded. It felt like I was making it creepy on purpose. Across the street, an old man in a lawn chair waved at me like he knew something I didn't. He cupped his ears with both hands and mouthed, "Noisy," and then he shook his head. I smiled and shut the door because another group was climbing the steps. My hand paused on the knob. The metal pulsed once against my palm like it had a heartbeat under it. I snatched my hand away and laughed like I was being silly. I opened the door with my other hand. "Happy Halloween," I said, and the house breathed out over my words, a warm, damp exhale that smelled like wet leaves and sink drains. One of the kids wrinkled her nose. "It smells weird," she said. Her mother pulled her back before she could step over the threshold. That tiny tug made my heart beat hard. I don't know why. It just did. I texted Marla during a quiet stretch. I wrote, "The furnace is making a weird breathing sound." She replied fast. She wrote, "You can hear it." Then she wrote, "Keep the front door mostly closed between groups and crack the kitchen window more. Do not let them stand inside." I stared at that last line for a long second. Then I typed, "Why?" Her typing bubble came and went twice. She wrote, "It gets excited on cold nights. Bowls are better. Do not let them cross the threshold, please." The word excited made me swallow. I put the bowl on a small side table by the door and kept the door mostly closed, pushing candy through a narrow gap like I was feeding something that might snap. The house seemed to like the new rhythm. The breathing got a little faster when footsteps came up the porch, then slowed when the porch creaked empty. A teenage boy with a skull mask held a balloon on a string. He reached for the bowl and the balloon drifted forward and kissed the door seam. The thin latex puckered. The balloon shrank a little with a quick whine like a deflating throat. He jerked it back and stared at the rubber. A wet stripe of condensation marked the spot where it touched. "What was that?" he asked, voice cracking behind the mask. "Static," I said too fast. He nodded like he wanted to believe me more than I did. Between groups, I heard tiny taps moving along the window glass like fingertips from the wrong side. I lifted the curtain and saw my own breath cloud the pane. When I drew a smiley face in the fog without thinking, another oval fog formed to the left of mine like someone leaned in. Then it was gone. The next exhale warmed my wrist through the gap in the curtain. I flinched. I opened the kitchen window another inch and the breathing sped up, greedy and light, like a pant. I went to close it back down, and the sash locked in place like a stiff joint. I did not like the word locked. I checked the back door too. It stuck to the frame as if a suction held it. Then the doorbell rang again, and the porch was full of little bodies and fabric and shoes. The house inhaled, and the door pulled against my hand, just a little, just enough to move. I pushed back. "Stay on the mat," I said to a tiny pirate who was already leaning in. The pirate frowned at me. "But it's warm inside," he said. The house exhaled on his face. He closed his eyes like it felt good. My phone buzzed again. Marla wrote, "If it starts to pull, do not breathe with it. Hold your breath." The words sounded insane until I watched dust in the hall lift and settle like it was counting breaths with me. I took a deep breath by instinct and the house inhaled with me, deeper, like it was using me as a guide. The door moved again against my palm. "Mom," the pirate said. "She won't let me in." I smiled at him and shook my head. "Porch only," I said, and my voice shook. He pouted. The house took a bigger breath. The latch brushed my thumb. The lock turned by itself in one smooth tick like a tongue against a tooth. The door swung wider, and the warm dark inside reached for the night. I jammed my shoulder into the door. The warm dark pressed back like breath from a mouth too big for a face. The latch skimmed my thumb again and turned another slow tick like a tongue tasting the seam. The pirate kid leaned forward, eyes closed in the heat. His mother grabbed his collar and jerked him back so hard he stumbled. "Sorry," she said to me, and her voice broke. "We'll go." The house inhaled across all our faces, hungry, and the porch mat slid a half-inch toward the threshold, as if it was on oil. I clamped my lips shut and held my breath like Marla said. My chest jumped against the want to breathe. The door strained inward. A tiny puff of warm air pushed past the latch and made the candy wrappers crackle. "Take two and go," I said through my teeth. It came out tight. The pirate snatched, the mother nodded, and they turned. The house exhaled after them with a sound that had shape. A long, soft note like a name you can almost hear but not quite. I shoved with my hip. The wood moved dry and slow, like skin on skin. The deadbolt was warm under my palm, warmer than metal should be in October. When it slid home, the whole frame thumped like a heart missed a beat. I put my forehead on the door and counted to 10 with my mouth open so I wouldn't inhale when it wanted me to. The breathing behind the wood kept time with me anyway. My phone buzzed. Marla wrote, "If it pulls, it means it's hungry. Do not let outside air in when it's hungry. Open inside things, drawers, closet doors, cupboards. Let it breathe itself. Starve it of new." The words made no kind of sense and felt right down to my bones. I went through the rooms, popping every door and drawer. The house's sound changed as each hinge bent. The inhale had a wet edge now, a soft slurp like someone sucking on a tooth. The exhale smelled like old coffee from the pantry and cedar from the coat closet, and the ghost of laundry detergent from the hall cabinet. It was breathing its own air now, and for a moment the front door went slack against my hand like it was tired. Kids came in waves. I kept the gap narrow, my boot in the seam like a wedge. Little hands reached through the warm draft and grabbed candy and pulled back fast, as if instinct whispered. The bowl got slick with condensation. Once when a girl with a cat nose leaned in too far, the house inhaled so quick her hair sucked sideways, and I got an image I did not ask for of that hair drifting in the dark like pondweed. I stomped the mat with my heel and said, "On the porch," and snapped the bowl to make noise. The house held its breath like it was waiting for me to cough first. The old man across the street stood up out of his chair and shuffled to the curb. He did not cross. He lifted his hand and turned his palm toward me like he was showing me something invisible. He mouthed, "Count." He pointed 2 fingers at his mouth and then closed his fist and shook his head. I nodded without meaning to, the way you nod when someone tells you something your body already knows. Near 9, a lanky teenager in a vampire cape wandered up alone with his phone out. "Sick decorations," he said. He put his face right by the crack and blew into the house like a joke, a fast joke breath. The hallway sucked in that little puff like it had been waiting hours for it. The boy blinked like something had just listened to him. "Weird echo," he said, frowning. I said, "Porch only," and slid the bowl into his hands and pushed the door hard enough that his cape skated forward. He glanced down and stepped back without making me tell him twice. I slipped once. I do not know why or how. Maybe a laugh from the street got me. Maybe I just forgot I was not allowed to be a person. I breathed in when it did. Our chests matched. For one long moment, I breathed with the house. The wood around me shivered like a dog had just found my scent. The air touched the back of my throat with a soft, grateful pressure, a thank you shaped out of warmth. I slammed my lips shut and bit my tongue and tasted metal and pushed, cursing myself in my head so hard it made my eyes sting. I know, I whispered, to the empty hall more than to myself. I know. I turned the kitchen window down to a sliver and taped it there with blue painter AS tape I found in a drawer. The tape peeled and restuck by itself twice like someone licked it from the other side. The sink made a wet click. The drain gurgled and sighed in time with the walls. I ran the garbage disposal for the noise. The motor whined thin over the deep breath sound, and I killed it quick because I thought for a blink the blades were breathing too. By 10, the street thinned. The last group was 2 little ghosts in sheet costumes holding hands. They reached for the bowl together and the house exhaled on their wrists in a long, slow line. The cotton sank to their skin and stuck. They pulled back with little shivers. "Thank you," they said, and their voices overlapped like a chord. When they went down the steps, the house inhaled in a way that hurt my ears, and then let it go, a disappointed drop. I locked everything and sat on the floor with my back to the door and counted the breaths with my fingers. In for 7, hold for 2, out for 6. The numbers held like a lullaby. Around midnight, the breathing slowed and deepened, as if the house had fallen asleep full. In the quiet, the noises left over from 100 lives crept in around the edges. Where in the stair, whisper from the return vent. The tiny tap of a cupboard hinge shifting back. I could hear it all, and under it all, I could hear myself. Here is the part I did not tell Marla. When the house fell into its slow sleep, my chest fell into it. I did not try to do that. My body made the choice for me. I held when it held. I let out when it let out. When I tried to change my rhythm, heat rose through the door behind me, a subtle scold. I made myself whisper numbers on the out-breath so I knew I had control. The numbers came out warm and fogged the painted wood between me and the night. In the morning the air was light and normal like a room after a party. I swept the porch. The mat had a faint, darker strip along the inside edge like a wet lip had pressed there. On the inside of the threshold, faint and parallel, were marks the length of fingers. They were not scratches. They were like places where the wood had been kissed. I took a picture and deleted it. Marla texted at 8. She wrote, "Thank you so much. All okay? Did anyone step in?" I wrote, "No." I waited. Then I wrote, "What is it?" Her dots came and went. She wrote, "Old house. It holds on to breath. It doesn't like cold. Did you breathe with it?" I watched that last sentence for a long time and wrote, "No." She sent a single heart. I stared at the little red shape until my eyes watered. That night in my apartment, when I turned off the lights and lay down, I heard it. Not loud, not the same, just a soft inhale at the bedroom door that matched my own. I held my breath. The hall held too. Somewhere in the dark, wood shifted with a small contented sound, like a satisfied swallow. I opened my window a crack. The curtain lifted and fell. In for 7, hold for 2, out for 6. I closed my eyes and did not move. The house I live in is brick and new and has never made a sound like that before. I am still listening to hear if it is my building or if it is just me. I saw the mask turn in the upstairs window and the house was supposed to be empty. It was the old blue place on Alder with a for sale sign half fallen over and a dead porch light. The window was a tall rectangle with rippled glass. The face was pressed flat against it like something inside had leaned hard. I thought it was just a decoration until it breathed. I was walking my cousin, Maya, and 2 of her friends. They were sticky with sweat and glitter, plastic pumpkins thudding at their knees. The street smelled like wet leaves and candle smoke. Music from somebody's speaker drifted over and mixed with the sound of sneakers on damp sidewalk. The mask didn't fit the scene. It was too still. It looked like pale skin glued to glass. I stared because that is what you do when you think you know what you are looking at and your body says you don't. The mask had a small, narrow mouth, just a slit, and the eyes were big ovals with no trim, like uncut holes. The edges were ragged where the latex should have been smooth, frayed like fabric. I lifted my hand and waved like an idiot. The face did not move. The glass did. A breath bloomed on the pane from the inside, a round fog patch like a kid's prank. It faded slow, as if the air in there was warm and patient. Maya followed my eyes and giggled like it was a joke. "That's creepy," she said, and then got distracted by a dog in a tiny cape. I stepped into the street to see if a reflection was playing games with me. The mask shifted as if to keep me in front of it. The fog oval formed again, not at the mouth, but at the nose spot where a mask would let air through. I whispered, "Okay," to no one, and felt my fingers go cold. A woman with a stroller paused near me. She glanced up, made a face, and looked away fast. "They always put that thing out," she said, quick and flat, like she was swatting a mosquito. "Don't wave." She pushed the stroller faster. I looked at the porch for signs of life. The railing had peeling paint. The mailbox had a lock on it that was stuck open. A spider web hung like lace. No candy bowl, no pumpkins. Just the upstairs window and that face. We had a dare when I was a kid. We used to say, "Look into an empty window for 10 seconds and it will show you its owner." I hadn't thought about that in years. I started counting without meaning to. On 4, the fog came again. On 7, I thought I saw the mouth slit widen. On 9, Maya's friend tugged at my jacket and said she was cold. On 10, a soft tap sounded through the glass, like a nail on a jar from the wrong side. I'm not brave, just dumb. I walked across the street while the kids hit the next house. Up close, the old blue paint was thick as frosting. The front steps sagged. The door had a realtor lockbox hanging from the knob, and the key slot was taped over. A note under the tape said, "Do not show without call." The upstairs window looked down at me like a face on a pillow. My breath floated up and made a ghost of me against the pane. The fog on the inside answered right where mine was. I took my phone out and tried to take a picture. The screen showed glare and then adjusted. Through the screen, the mask looked newer, shinier, like wet skin. My thumbnail shook against the glass of the phone. I snapped the photo and looked. The picture was dark and grainy and showed a face in the window, but it wasn't the pale mask. It was me, with my hair wrong and my mouth too small. I told myself I was tired and the phone was terrible and the window was old. I told myself a lot of normal things. The mask fogged the glass again, steady, unbothered. The fog shape was not exactly at the mouth slit. It was too high, where a real nose would be if the face was pressed flat. Something about that made my stomach turn. I went back to the sidewalk and decided to ignore the house. The mask did not ignore me. As we walked, I kept glancing back. In the reflection of a car window, the upstairs face showed as a smear. When we reached the corner, the face was in a different window. It had moved to a smaller one on the stair landing that looked directly at the street. It was lower now, closer to eye level, like it had come down a step. We did 3 more houses in quick, nervous stops. Every time we turned, the face was in a new pane in that house, tracking the angle of my head. On the last, when the kids were bargaining about who got whose lollipop, I saw it not in the blue house at all, but in a dark window of the caterer's kitchen 1 door down, a window that faced the sidewalk. The mouth line looked wider. The fog oval on the glass was bigger, the size of a hand. We went home early because I said I had a headache. I walked Maya up to my building. My windows faced the same street. The hall smelled like dust and hot metal. We climbed the stairs, and my heart did that hollow skip a drummer does when he misses the beat. My apartment door was normal. The lock turned normal. The entryway felt normal until I looked left. My bedroom window faces the parking lot. The curtain was half open because I never pull it fully shut. In the gap, pressed to the cold glass from the inside like it had climbed out of my bed and leaned there, was the same pale face. The eyes were empty ovals. The mouth slit was a little longer, a little softer. A fog bloom formed on my side of the pane, not behind it. The glass felt warm when the air hit it. I walked toward it before I told my feet to. The room was quiet in that old way. Heat snapping in the baseboard, house sounds clicking back after we had left them alone. The mask didn't twitch. The fog spot grew and shrank like it was timing me. I reached out and put my palm flat on the glass. It was warm. The warmth pulsed once like a held breath. Then the window latch lifted with a small, polite click. The sash shivered under my hand and began to rise. I pressed down. The sash rose anyway, smooth and polite, like a hand held a breath and then let it go. The warm glass slid under my palm and the face stayed close, not moving, just letting the distance change between us. The little mouth slit looked softer up close, like wet paper cut with a dull knife. A fog bloom formed on my side of the pane again, right where my nose was, as if I was the one behind the glass. "Maya," I said without looking back, "go to the hall." She didn't move. I heard the tiny, plasticky creak of her pumpkin pail handle twist in her grip. "Why is it inside?" she asked, and I hated that she had said the word I was trying not to think. The latch lifted the rest of the way with a second small click. The gap at the bottom opened to 2 inches. Cold night leaned in. The curtain breathed toward the sill and settled. Something between the curtain and the glass peeled, a slow release, like pulling a label off a bottle after it is soaked in a sink. The edge of the face lifted first. It did not lift all at once. It lifted in little shivers. I shoved the sash back down, and it came with me because I am heavier and because it wanted to be polite. The face did not change. It looked like a mask someone had pressed flat against the world and then forgotten. I held the window closed with my hip and pulled the lock down. It fell in place. The feeling in my teeth said it would not matter. "Call your mom," I said. "Tell her I will meet her at the corner in 2 minutes." Maya's phone chimed in her pocket. She looked down and then up past me, eyes getting big and slow. "It's in the TV," she whispered. I turned my head. In the black screen of the TV across the room, my reflection stood with a hand on the window. Behind my shoulder in the glass was a long, pale shape that did not belong to me. The eye holes in the shape were bigger than mine. The mouth was too small. When I moved my hand from the window, the reflection did not move at the same time. It was late by a breath. "Hall now," I said, and walked backward. I kept my hand on the sash because I could not make myself not do that. We reached the doorway and I glanced at the peephole like a habit. The peephole was dark. Then it brightened with a pale circle that filled it. A fog ring formed on the inside of the lens, tiny and perfect. A small tap sounded, polite, a nail on a jar. I covered the peephole with my thumb and turned the deadbolt. The door would not open. It was not stuck. It was waiting. The knob turned too easily under my palm, and I could feel the faint give of my own skin on the metal, like the door wanted a better touch. I stepped back. The TV screen showed me do it a second late. Behind my reflection, the window curtain lifted as if a face right there had taken a deeper breath. The mask peeled itself off the glass. That is the closest way I can say it. The edges came first, then the cheeks, then the long nose bridge. The eye holes stayed last, kissing the pane in 2 soft ovals before they broke their seal with a wet sigh. The thing slumped onto the sill like damp laundry. It did not flop. It settled into a shape, then rose a little as if full of breath. The inside of it was not hollow. It looked soft, like the inside of a pocket. "Don't put it on," Maya said, and then clapped a hand to her mouth like she was afraid she had given me an idea. I laughed once by accident. The sound was wrong in the room. It moved in a simple way, without joints. It slid down the wall, leaving a faint damp behind, and stopped at the height of my face. I stepped left. It aimed left. I stepped right. It turned right. It did not hurry. It did not need to. It already knew where my skin would be. I grabbed a towel and slapped it at the thing. The towel stuck and went dark in the center like breath had blown into it from underneath. I pressed it to the mask and felt the shape of a cheekbone push back. The towel warmed. It wanted to be worn. In the TV screen, I watched my own arm lift. My reflection had something pale over its fingers, a smear of face that wasn't mine. Its mouth opened wider than it should have. It looked like it was already wearing me. I backed into the hallway, dragging Maya. The bathroom mirror threw us a picture of ourselves with the overhead light glaring. There was a pale shape in that glass too, not on the surface this time, but in the silver behind it like a bruise. I threw the towel and shut the bathroom door. The door bounced because I forgot the hook on the back always hits the shelf. The hook tapped the wood in a quick, polite rhythm, 3 beats. The sound was the same as the window latch, the same as the peephole tap. It made my stomach drop in that old way, a kid way, like somebody had just called me by my full name from down the hall. I counted to 10, I said without meaning to. My voice sounded thin. I shouldn't have done that. Maya stared at me like I was the adult who forgot how to be adult, which I was. What do we do? She said. We don't look at it, I said. We don't breathe on it. We don't give it a face. We left the lights on and sat with our backs to the door and listened. The house made patient living sounds. The TV turned its screensaver on, a slow drift of color. Every time the color passed a dark edge, the pale oval shape showed in the glass for a second and then softened as if it wanted us to think it had not been there at all. When my sister knocked 20 minutes later, her knock sounded real and annoyed. I opened the door and stared hard at her skin, at the way her cheeks moved under her eyes, at how her breath fogged the air in small, honest clouds. We went out together. We did not look at my windows from the street. We did not look at any windows. Cold air touched our faces and cleared our heads like a warning. I slept at her place. In the morning, I went back for the cat. My apartment was quiet. The window was shut. The latch was down. The TV showed my dark reflection. In the upstairs glass of the old blue house on Alder, a face was pressed again to the rippled pane, pale and patient. When I lifted my phone for a picture, the screen showed a better view than my eyes. It showed me in my own bedroom, with my hand on the window. My mouth in the picture was a little too small. My eyes were a little too wide. A fog bloom formed on my side of the phone glass and faded slow. Somewhere behind me, very close, a latch made a small, polite click. I noticed him halfway down Maple Street, at the edge of the porch light where the shadows look soft and people look smaller. He wasn't a dad and he wasn't a kid. No costume, no mask. Just a long dark coat that hung like it had been wet before and dried on him, and a plain pillowcase limp in his left hand. He kept the same distance from us no matter how fast we walked or how long we stopped. He did not take candy. He did not talk. He just followed. I was walking my little brother, Eli, and 2 of his friends. They clacked around in plastic armor, breath fogging, candy buckets thudding like drums against their knees. The night smelled like damp leaves and candle smoke and cheap chocolate. The street was bright with porch lights and those blow-up ghosts that lean when the wind dies. It felt safe because Halloween always pretends to be safe. At the first house where I noticed him, I thought he was with the group ahead of us. At the second, I thought he was a neighbor out to watch. At the third, when we crossed to the other side and he crossed behind us without looking, I told myself he lived on that block. Then we turned right where the street dead ends, and he turned too, and there were no more houses he could have pretended to head toward. He kept the same slow pace, the same space, like he was tethered to us. His face looked wrong from far away without looking wrong up close. I know that sounds stupid. From far, his mouth looked like a straight line under a nose that was too narrow. Up close, when we passed under a streetlight, his features made sense, but they did not match the shadows they threw. His eyes did not shine like everyone else's eyes in the damp light. They looked dull, like polished stone. He blinked, slow and late, like he had to remember to do it. Eli tugged my sleeve. "He's not wearing a costume," he said, half whisper, half brag, like he wanted me to tell him it was fine. I said, "Some people don't," and that made my voice feel like a lie in my own mouth. At the corner by the church, I stopped and tied Eli's shoe. It was an excuse to look back. The man stopped too. He did not pretend to check his phone or talk or tie anything. He lifted the pillowcase a little as if to show it was empty and then let it hang again. The bottom of the bag was dark, not with weight, but with damp, like breath inside a mask. A different mom passing with a stroller met my eyes in that way women do in public when something is off. "Is he with you?" she asked, voice low. I shook my head. Behind me a block ago, she said, still moving, like she had to keep going or she'd think about it too hard. He keeps the same steps. I tried something dumb then. I told the kids we were skipping the next 3 houses and going straight to the corner store for a hot chocolate. We cut through the parking lot behind the library. The lot is lit with blue-white lights that buzz and make people look sick. I listened for his footsteps, but they didn't sound like footsteps. They sounded like a coat brushing against itself. In the reflection in the library windows, I saw us like ghosts, stretched and flat. Behind us, a long, dark shape moved at the same slow pace. The pillowcase dragged the least bit on the asphalt and made a sound like a breath dragged over teeth. At the store door, I held it open too long on purpose, to force him to pass us or stand near. He did neither. He stopped right at the edge of the light, like a dog taught to heel. Eli asked for a hot chocolate, eyes on the pastry case like kids do when they pretend to be casual. I bought 3 cups so I had something to do with my hands. The clerk, an older guy with a red nose and a soft voice, leaned over the counter and looked out past me. "You want me to call somebody?" he asked, also in that voice people use when they don't want to say the real word. I said, "Maybe he's just walking," and hated how easy the sentence came out. The clerk said, "Not like that," and lifted a finger. I thought he meant the way the man stood. Then I realized the clerk was pointing at the man's shoes. They were not wet, but his footprints on the black mat outside the door looked wet and a little stretched, as if his feet were longer than the shoe shape wanted to allow. The kids needed a bathroom. I took them, washed sticky fingers, wiped a nose, kept up the bright tone. When we came out, the man stood at the exact same distance, as if he had not moved at all. But we had. The pillowcase hung the same way, dark at the bottom. But now it moved with a tiny inhale and exhale, as if something inside was breathing shallow and slow. We went back to trick or treat because pretend normal is sometimes the safest thing. I made us mix up the route, double back, cut across lawns, skip lit houses for dark ones, and then go back again. Every time I looked, he was there, behind us. Never closer, never farther. At one porch, a woman with a bowl said, "One per kid," in that tired way, and squinted at him past my shoulder. She said, "Sir?" The man inclined his head to her like a waiter and did not reach for candy. She shivered and said, "Never mind," and closed her door careful, like the door had a sore place she didn't want to bump. By 9, the street got thin. The inflatable ghosts had fallen over. The air smelled like cold dirt and wax. I said we were done. No one argued. We cut down Oak to my place, a duplex with a narrow porch and a weak yellow light. My neighbor's window had a string of purple lights humming, and my jack-o'-lantern had slumped into the face it always slumps to after a day, mouth sagging like it is tired of pretending. I told the kids to go in and lock the bathroom, to turn the fan on, to splash water so they wouldn't listen. They did, because they are good kids and because they wanted to believe I was being dramatic about bedtime. I stood on the porch with the candy bag like a shield and watched the man stop at the sidewalk. He did not step onto my path. He did not turn. He just stood, pillowcase at his side, head tilted the smallest bit, as if he was listening to something inside my door. I went in. I locked the deadbolt and the chain and the knob. The hallway smelled like warm plastic from the costumes and wet leaves from shoes. The fan in the bathroom hummed. I slid down the inside of the door and sat on the rug. I listened. The street got quiet. A car passed once. Somewhere far off, a dog barked, and then another. Then, soft and slow, steps came up my path. Not the drag I'd heard before, not the brush. Steps, like someone who had decided to finally arrive. The pillowcase whispered on the porch wood. The breath of it pushed under the door. The knob turned a little and stopped. The chain lifted one link and settled. Then, right at the bottom of the door, where the light from the porch sneaks in, a shadow like the shape of a hand slid across the crack and rested there, palm down, as if waiting to be held. The mail slot creaked open. Something leaned close to the gap, and a warm, damp breath touched my cheek through the slit as a voice I knew too well whispered my name. I did not answer. The mail slot flap hung crooked, and warm air leaked through in a slow ribbon that touched my cheek and made my eyes sting. The voice said my name again in my dad's tone, soft and certain, with the little hitch he had when he was tired. He has been gone a year. Hearing him there made my chest pull tight in a way that felt like a trick pulled straight out of my heart. I slid on my knees until my shoulder covered the slot. I put my palm over the gap. The metal was warm the way a mouth is warm. The breath pushed against my skin like it was tasting the shape of my hand. I said, "Eli," quiet and hard. "Turn the fan up. Open the bathroom window. Breathe out the window." The fan hummed higher. Water ran. A kid voice said, "Okay," too loud, and I flinched because I didn't want whatever was outside to know we were doing anything at all. The voice through the slot changed. It was my mom's for a second, then my own, then someone I didn't know. It said, "Open," as if the word was heavy. The chain on the door lifted one link and settled like something had touched it, curious. The pillowcase whispered against the porch boards. I saw its corner dip into the line of light at the threshold like a tongue. I called 911 and pressed the phone to my ear with my shoulder while I kept my hand over the slot. The operator answered with the tired calm that made me want to cry. I said my address and that someone was at my door and would not leave. The operator asked what he looked like. I said, "He follows. He does not blink right. He has a bag." I knew I sounded strange. The operator said, "Stay on the line." And then for a breath, the operator's voice turned into my dad's voice saying, "Stay," in exactly the way he used to tell our dog. I pulled the phone away like it had bitten me. The line filled with wet static. The operator came back faint and far, asking me to repeat myself. The call snapped off on its own. The flap lifted under my palm with a polite little tap and my hand slid on damp metal. A strip of fabric slipped through the gap, pale and flat and soft at the edge. The open mouth of the pillowcase pressed thin. It made a careful shape, not reaching for my wrist. It aimed for my mouth. It knew where a breath would come out. I clamped my lips shut and turned my head and pressed my cheek to the rug. The fabric touched the corner of my mouth anyway, and I felt a pull. Not hard, not violent, but insistent, like being kissed by someone who knows the rhythm of your breathing. I gagged and held it back. The taste that came off the cloth was like old candy and sink water. The voice through the slot said, "Please," and it was my dad and me at the same time. I crab-walked backward, dragging my cheek off the cloth, and grabbed the first thing my hand hit on the shoe rack. It was a can of cold spray we use for sports injuries. I shook it hard and blasted the strip of fabric where it came through. Frost bloomed on the cloth in a lace, and the soft pull went slack. The pillowcase jerked back with a papery sigh. The flap clapped shut and shivered like a tooth. The porch was quiet for a second that felt longer than it was. Then the voice came at the back door, the side window, the tiny vent by the floor, thin and polite, saying my name in different tones, like knocking with a mouth. The coat sound moved along my siding. The bag dragged in a slow loop around my house. I could feel where he was by the way the air changed. The bathroom fan roared and covered the kid's breath like a blanket. I texted my neighbor upstairs. She is a nurse and does not scare easy. I typed, "Someone is outside my door. Do not open yours." She wrote back at once, calling. Blue light painted my ceiling a few minutes later. A car door slammed. A radio murmured. I heard boots on the walk. The man stepped back to the sidewalk like a dog told to sit. He held the pillowcase loose at his side, and now I could see it move even from that distance. A small in and out like ribs under a shirt. The officers knocked. I opened the door with the chain still on. My voice came out too friendly. I told them about the following and the way he kept the same distance. I did not say the thing about voices. One officer went down to talk to him. The other took my name and asked if I wanted a report. Through the crack, I watched the man tilt his head to the officer and listen like he always listened. He did not argue. He did not run. The pillowcase hung and breathed. They told me he had not trespassed. Not technically. They told me to call if he came closer. They pulled away. Lights off now, and the moment their car turned the corner, the coat sound returned. Soft and certain, like a song I had already learned. I put the kids on the couch and doled out blankets and made my voice bright. I told a story about the time I was little and got scared of a scarecrow. They laughed because that is what good kids do to help you. They fell asleep with their mouths open in kid ways. I sat by the door and counted the breaths around me. The man silked itself under the other sounds of the street, patient. Near 3, the house settled deep in its own sleep. I must have drifted. I woke because the air near my face felt too warm. The fan was off. The thermostat glowed orange. A small soft sound came from the coat closet behind me, a slide and a sigh, the sound of fabric breathing in a dark. I opened the closet with a push and the smell of damp candy came out. On the floor, curled like a sleeping animal with its mouth at the door seam, lay a plain pillowcase. It was empty. It was damp along the bottom. As I watched, the fabric lifted and fell in a small rhythm and then went still, pretending. I carried it at arm's length to the porch and dropped it there. The man on the sidewalk did not move. The pillowcase at my feet made a soft sound like a tongue touching a tooth and then lay quiet again, like it had held its breath because I was looking. The man turned his head the smallest bit, like a proud owner might when a dog learns a new trick. In the morning, it was gone. The porch was dry. The boards had a faint darker stripe where the fabric had laid its mouth. We went on with our day the way people do when they have to go to work and school and pretend food tastes normal. Every night since, he stands at the edge of whatever light I have, holding a bag that looks empty and is not. When I walk home from the bus, I hear the coat sound behind me no matter which street I take. I do not speak when I am near my door. I do not breathe hard. I have seen the bag move when I laugh in the kitchen, even with the windows closed. Last week, Eli got a call from my number while he sat on the couch across from me. He put it on speaker. The voice said his name in my dad's tone and asked if he would come hold the door a second. We turned the fan on high. We opened the bathroom window. We breathed small. We listened to the bag at the edge of the room, patient, like it had all the time in the world. He never stops following. He never knocks. He only waits until you say your own name back. By 9:30, the candy bowl should have shown glass at the bottom. It didn't. It looked as full as it had at 6, when I taped a little sign to the rim that said, "Take one." I had filled it with 3 big bags I bought on sale, mixed brands and colors. The bowl itself wasn't mine. It came with the house, an old ceramic thing painted with faded grapes, crazed lines in the glaze like tiny spider webs. It was heavy even when it was empty. That is what I told myself at first when I lifted it and felt the weight hadn't changed. It sat on a small table on the porch, right under the light. The air smelled like wet leaves and candle smoke and sugar. Kids came in waves, costumes squeaking, sneakers thumping, breath showing in little clouds. They took and moved on. Every time I glanced down, the bowl was still a gentle hill of candy, wrappers shining, no hollow spots, no slump. My neighbor, Mrs. Pratt, came out with her dog in a sweater. She pointed her chin at the bowl. "That old thing," she said. "He left it." She meant the previous owner of my house, an old man who passed away in spring. He used to sit right where you are and watch that bowl. Wouldn't let anyone take more than one. Said it was about fairness. She made a face like the word tasted bad. "Fairness doesn't get you far," she said, and shuffled on. A group of little kids in cardboard robots came up the steps. They reached in together, hands bright with marker and glitter. 4 pieces went out. 4 pieces appeared at the top like they had risen up from the middle. Same brand, same angle, wrappers not even wrinkled. I blinked and told myself I'd seen a reflection. One of the kids asked if he could have 2. "Take one," I said without thinking, and the word came out tight like my mouth didn't want to open. When the porch was empty for a minute, I tested it. I counted 20 wrapped pieces aloud, moving them to the far side of the bowl, and then I waited until the next group took them. The bowl looked the same after. I picked one up. The wrapper felt warm, not house warm, skin warm. A faint damp clung to the cellophane like breath had fogged the inside. The knot at the end felt soft, not twisted by a machine but pressed by fingers. My stomach did that small drop a roller coaster does when it starts. I lifted the bowl to bring it in for a refill even though it didn't need one. The bottom had left a wet ring on the wood as if a pot had sat there and cooled. The underside of the bowl was warmer than my palms. In the halo of porch light, I saw a darker band in the glaze along the outer bottom edge, a line too straight to be a glaze crack. It looked like a seam. When I ran my thumb along it, the warmth grew under my skin in a slow push, and the hairs on my arm lifted as if air had moved through there. The sign on the rim sagged. I pressed the tape down. The ink had bled a little. The letters looked like someone had traced my handwriting with a wet finger. Take One had softened into something like Take On. I told myself I had a sweaty hand. I flipped the card over and wrote it again. Take One. My pen stuttered. The end of the word looked like an open mouth. A lanky teenager in a hoodie came up, all elbows and fake fangs. He grabbed a handful. I started to say something and didn't. The candy looked too bright in his fist. He stuffed it in his bag and moved down the steps. He reached the sidewalk and stopped. He turned, confused, and opened his bag. He pawed at it and made a face. "It's empty," he said, like he was telling me a joke I had to get or else. It was just in my hand. He stood there a long beat and then walked away fast like he felt dumb. I looked down. The exact same brand and colors sat back on top, right where his fist had left a dent. The wrappers were uncreased. It was like watching a bed unwrinkle itself. The bowl felt heavier when I lifted it again. The table creaked under it with a small sound that felt like a breath held and let go. I brought it inside because that made me feel like I had done something. I put it on the kitchen counter and poured candy into a baking tray to see if there was a bottom or if some dumb trick was happening with the shape. The tray filled and filled, the candies slid, and the bowl stayed round and full. The wrappers made a soft whispering sound when they touched. A sound like a whisper in another room that you keep pretending you didn't hear. I dug with both hands until I touched bare ceramic. The bottom wasn't smooth. It had fine cuts in it, radiating lines that converged at the center like a mouth of a flower. My fingers slipped between two hairline gaps in the glaze. Warm air moved there. It wasn't the house. It was coming from the bowl. It smelled like old sugar and dishwater and something faintly sour. At the very center, something was stamped into the glaze in pale letters. I had to tilt my head to read it. "Do not empty," it said, the letters small and neat, like the kind you see on the bottom of a mug. Right under the words, the glaze was cracked and a bit soft. I pressed. It felt like pressing the inside of your cheek. The next group rang the bell. I left the bowl on the counter and handed candy out by the fistful from a bag. When I came back, the bowl on the counter was still full. I had not put anything back in it. A wet ring spread out from under it like condensation, but the counter wasn't cold. I wiped it and the rag smelled like artificial grape and a hint of breath. My phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't have. It said, "Keep something in the bowl at all times. Do not scrape clean." My skin tightened like I had stepped into cold water. I typed, "Who is this?" No answer came. The bowl made a soft sound like a tongue touching a tooth, and a single wrapped piece slid from the middle up to the top as if it wanted to be seen. The wrapper was old-fashioned, clear cellophane with twisted ends, and the candy inside looked like a hard caramel. I hadn't bought any caramel. I picked it up. The plastic was damp on the inside, fogged like a breath. A tiny hair was trapped in the twist. The candy itself had a small pale speck at its center, like a seed. It was warm through the wrapper. I set it on the counter and the piece rolled back toward the bowl on its own, slow and sure, and tapped the rim like a polite knock. I told myself I'd prove there was a bottom. I dug both arms in until my elbows hit the rim. My fingers reached the stamped words and the soft glazed cracks, and then they found a hollow, not ceramic, but a thin place. Warm air pulsed gently against my knuckles. The candies around my wrists shifted like a tide. The bowl sighed through its seam. The rim went warmer under my skin. I tried to pull my hands back and couldn't. Something under that thin spot pressed up against my fingertips and held, patient as a mouth deciding where to bite. I tried to pull. The candy around my wrists tightened like wet plastic. My fingertips pressed into that thin, soft center, and something pressed back, slow and curious. It was like touching the inside of a cheek. The rim warmed more under my forearms. The bowl gave a long, low sigh through the hairline seam on its base, and I felt it in my elbows. The doorbell rang and a chorus of little voices shouted, "Trick or treat." The sound pushed through my spine. "1 second," I called, and my voice bumped the candy. The wrappers rustled like leaves. The pressure on my fingertips shifted. It felt like the bowl was tasting which part of me it wanted most. My phone buzzed on the counter near my hip. I couldn't see the screen. I bent, fumbled it to the edge with my elbow, and tipped it with my wrist until it landed face up, nose unlock. I leaned down and tapped the code with my tongue like an idiot. A message glowed from the same unknown number. It said, "Give it weight. Metal. Do not give it skin." Another came right after. It said, "Hurry." I sucked air through my teeth. My keys were in my front pocket. I couldn't reach with my hands stuck halfway to the bottom. I turned my hip until the denim creaked and got the key ring between my fingers and the bowl rim. I caught a loop with my teeth and dragged. The ring scraped my lips. The bowl pressed harder up into my fingertips, patient. The front doorbell rang again. A child laughed like a hiccup. My stomach dropped. I spat the keys onto the candy pile. They slid down like coins into a fountain. When they reached the center, the warm place under my fingers flexed, and the keys passed through that thin spot with a tiny wet pop. The bowl sighed again, deeper, a please and thank you kind of sound. The pressure let go. My hands came free with a soft peel. Fine threads stretched from my knuckles to the bottom and snapped one by one, making little happy noises that made my skin crawl. I pulled my arms out fast. The bowl left a pattern on my forearms. Thin, pale lines, curved and cracked like crazing in glaze, ran in a circle where the rim had held me. My fingers tingled like they had been asleep. Under my nails, sugar glowed faint and pink like I had dipped my hands in cough drops. I grabbed a grocery bag and went to the door. "Sorry," I said too bright, and poured candy straight from the bag into little open hands without letting anyone inside. "Happy Halloween." They ran down the steps, wrappers already crinkling. I shut the door and put my forehead to the wood and counted to 5. The bowl was quiet on the counter. The weight of it sat in the room like a held breath. When I looked, the candy hill was smooth again. On top, one piece I didn't recognize had risen. Clear wrap, old-style twist. Inside, not a caramel. My keys floated in the middle, suspended like a fly in amber. The metal looked darker, like old brass. The cellophane was fogged on the inside like it was a mouth. I said no, under my breath, to no one. It made no difference. I picked it up. The plastic was warm and a little damp. The knot at one end felt like a pulse. I tried to tear the wrapper and it stretched. When I pulled harder, the candy inside flexed soft around the keys and then went hard fast, as if it had taken a breath and held it. I put it down. My own breath fogged the counter for a second and faded. Another text arrived. It said, "Do not break it open in warm air. Cold first, then keep something in, always." The words looked wrong on my screen, like they were sinking. I stuck the wrapped keys in the freezer tray. The plastic tightened as the cold took it. A tiny crack formed along the candy-ass edge and pale frost raced across the sugar like lace. In a minute, I could pry the keys free. When they dropped into my palm, they were too cold to hold, and they smelled like fake grape and sink. I carried the bowl back to the porch and set it in the light. The sign on the rim, the new one I had written, had smeared again. The letters didn't look like mine anymore. Take one looked like leave one until you blinked. I taped it back down anyway. Kids came, took one, moved on. When a teenager tried a handful, he got to the sidewalk and looked at his bag with a lost face. "Empty," he said, more to himself than to me. The bowl's hill didn't change. Around 11, the street went quiet. The porch felt too warm. I picked the bowl up. It was heavier than it should have been. The seam along its base gave a tiny wet click. Under the weight, the little table made a sound like a sigh. I carried the bowl into the kitchen and set it on the counter. A text came again. It said, "Do not empty after midnight. Leave something until dawn. If you empty, it will take breath." I stood there with my hands on the counter until the clock on the stove clicked to 12:01. The sound of the click felt like a step on an old stair. The candies in the bowl settled a little and then rose back like lungs. I opened the junk drawer and dumped batteries, paper clips, a handful of washers, a penny into the bowl. They sank and the candy surface smoothed over them. The bowl warmed under the hill. The seam hissed and went quiet. I tried to sleep on the couch with the TV on low. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt sugar soften against my teeth. At 3, a soft sound woke me. Not the doorbell, not the fridge. A key turned in a lock. My front door. The sound came from inside the bowl. I went to the kitchen. The room stood still, dark and old and normal. The bowl on the counter was full. On top, another piece had risen. Same clear wrapper, same fog. Inside this one, not my keys. A key I had never seen. Long and thin, old cut. A brass tongue with a heart-shaped head. The candy around it pulsed once under the plastic and went still, like it was happy with what it had made. I held the wrapped key and felt cold creep up my neck. In the hall off the kitchen there is a narrow door I always meant to paint shut. I never used it. It has an old lock that never fit my set. The air from that hall was warm, like the bowl. I walked over and held the candy up. The key inside matched the lock shape. The bowl behind me sighed, a little proud. I put the wrapped key in the freezer again. It chilled and cracked. The sugar stiffened and went dull. The key dropped free, warm at the core like it had a pulse. I stood there with it on my palm and thought about leaving the house. I thought about throwing the bowl in the dumpster. I thought about the text that said keep something in until dawn. The cat walked into the kitchen and sat, looking at me with slow blinks. The bowl made one soft click, a sound like a nail on a jar from far away. I turned the old lock in the narrow door. It accepted the key like it had been waiting. Warm air lifted my hair and a small breath from the dark. It smelled like candy left in water. Before I pushed the door, my phone buzzed on the counter. The text said, "Do not empty what he started." I did not open the door. I put the key back on top of the candy hill. It sank, then rose again on the surface, wrapped now, cellophane cloudy as breath. The bowl will not empty, no matter what I do. When I try to feed it trash, it gives back something else. Sometimes it is a candy I never bought. Sometimes it is something of mine, altered. The seam still sighs after midnight. I keep the bowl under its porch light like a night lamp for a mouth. I keep something in it until the sky gets pale. I do not open the narrow door. I think of the old man who sat here before me, and how he would not let anyone take more than one. I think I know why. The bowl is patient. It has my shape on its rim now, a faint ring where my skin warmed the glaze. It will wait until I let it empty. It will wait until I breathe the wrong way. It will wait until I am tired and open that door. I didn't believe footprints could show up by themselves until I watched one rise, wet and dark, right in the middle of my porch on Halloween night. It was cold and dry out. The boards were dusty, the kind of gray that comes from old paint and a long fall. I had a bowl on a little table by the door and a cheap plastic skeleton hanging from a nail. Kids came and went, wrappers crackling, the air smelling like leaves and candle smoke. Then, between groups, a bare footprint formed on the wood like a hand pressing up through water from underneath. I was alone. My sister had dropped off her twins and picked them up an hour ago. The street had thinned out. I had turned the porch light a little dimmer because my jack-o'-lantern was dying and I didn't want to see its face collapse. I was leaning on the doorframe, half inside for the warmth, when the dark oval appeared at my toes. It filled from the heel forward. The wet climbed up the wood grain in a slow shape until 5 toe marks appeared, neat and narrow. The toes were long, longer than they should be. They left tiny darker tips where the nails would have been. Steam lifted from the print in a thin thread that vanished fast in the cold. I told myself a kid had come up barefoot and I hadn't noticed. Then I looked at the steps. The steps were clean, no marks, no damp. The footprint had appeared on the porch but not on the stairs. That felt wrong in a way my mouth didn't know how to say. Someone's barefoot, a girl in a witch hat said as she reached for candy. Her mom tugged her back. "Don't step on that," the mom said too fast. She had that voice people use when something thorns up in their gut and they can explain it. She steered her kid to the side. The witch made a face and they left quick. I knelt and touched the edge of the print with one finger. Warm. Not like sun-on-wood warm. Body warm. It left a thin glaze on my skin that smelled like sweet water left in a sink. I wiped it on my jeans and my jeans went dark in a shape like a tongue. I went inside for paper towels. When I came back, a second print had formed a half step closer to the door, toe to heel, like someone had walked backwards toward me. The toes pointed to the street. The heel was at my threshold. I laughed once because I didn't know what else to do. I pressed the towels down. The paper went damp and warm. When I lifted it, the print was back, refilling from underneath, slow and sure, like the wood itself was breathing out wet. A car rolled by with music low. In the glass of the window by the door, I saw my reflection and the dark shapes at my feet. The second print looked a little different from the first if I stared. The second had 6 toes. The extra one was small and set in a little. It made my stomach jump like a skip on a record. Mrs. Harlan from across the street shuffled out with her dog and stopped, staring at my porch. "Again?" she said, like I had dropped the ball. "Salt," she added, pointing at my feet. "Keep a line, don't scuff it." I said, "What?" She shook her head like I was slow. "They like this side of the block. He never kept salt and look what happened." She jerked her chin at my house. She meant the old man who died here. Then she went back inside like she told me to water my plants. "I don't keep salt on my porch. I do have a bag of ice melt in the closet. I didn't want to step over the prints." The space between the second print and my doormat felt wrong to step into, like pushing into someone's breath. I went around through the living room and came out with a box of kosher salt from the kitchen. I poured a thin white line along the threshold. The salt looked too bright in the porch light, like teeth. The third footprint formed while I was pouring. It rose on the other side of the line, closer to the street again. Same long toes. The second toe crooked like a finger that healed wrong. The wet stopped at the salt and hissed a little. The hiss smelled sharp, like hot pennies and fake grape. The boards around the print pulsed once under my hand like they had a small heart. A group of teenagers came up laughing and fell silent when they saw the marks. One boy said, "Nope," under his breath, and tugged his mask up so he could see better. I kept the door mostly closed and passed candy through a gap, keeping my foot against the bottom so the salt line wouldn't scuff. As they left, one of them stepped close to the edge of the first footprint without touching it. The print filled a little deeper, darkening, as if it liked the nearness of his heat. I watched for an hour. The prints did not fade. They did not spread like normal water. They held their shape like ink poured into cut wood. Sometimes a fine bubble rose in one and popped with a tiny wet sound. The pattern didn't make sense. Some faced the street, some faced the door. A pair turned left as if to go around my chair. There were no step marks on the stairs, no damp on the rail, no smear at the edges. Just clean, neat, warm feet, appearing in places a foot could not have touched. Around 10:30, 2 new prints formed at once, side by side, toes pointing at my door, heels back toward the street. They were closer than the others, almost touching the salt. The left one had a scar line across the arch, a fine pale stripe like it had been cut and healed. I know that line. I have the same scar. I got it at a pool when I was a kid. I felt it throb in my own foot when I saw it in the wood. The right print had a dime-sized mole mark right where my brother has one. I don't know why I thought of him right then. He lives 3 states away. Something popped in the salt line, as if a tiny bubble had reached it and failed. The porch air got warmer by a breath. The next footprint formed not on the porch. It formed on the inside, a wet oval blooming on my hall floor just past the threshold, as if a foot had stepped over the door and sat down on my rug. The shape held and steamed and waited. The boards under my palm pulsed again. The doorknob turned a slow 1/8 of an inch all by itself. I pressed the deadbolt down with my thumb and felt the knob turn that tiny bit under it anyway, like a hand on the other side wanted to match my fingers. The wet oval on my hall rug steamed slow. It was the size of a foot, but it didn't sit flat. The edges lifted and fell like a little breath. I poured salt in a ring around that print. The grains hissed and the steam thinned. I felt stupid and right at the same time. Before I could feel anything else, a second print rose beyond the ring, farther down the hall, as if whatever made it had already taken another step before I did anything. The boards under my palm pulsed again. The doorknob turned another small click. I slid the chain tighter and put my boot heel against the base of the door so I would feel if it pushed. "You're not coming in," I said out loud to Wood because speaking made me less afraid of thinking. A new print formed outside the line, near the coat chair, toes toward the door. It had 6 toes like the one before. The extra toe sat a little off, shy. I poured more salt. The hiss felt like a tiny burn in my nose, like hot pennies. A smell rose with it, fake grape and wet wood. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A text popped up from an unknown number. It said, "Do not step in them. Do not follow the order. Keep the line." The words looked like they were written fast. I typed, "Who is this?" No dots, no reply. The wet dark on my rug darkened like it liked me paying attention to the phone. I thought of flour. I dumped a bag in a line across the hall like snow. The flour lay still and white. Then a print lifted under it from the boards themselves, blooming dark through the powder, toe to heel, the powder turning gray and clinging to the shape like a second skin. I watched the toes appear, long and neat, and knew the second toe would be crooked before it formed. It was. The print past the flour wasn't there yet, and then it was, as if the step had already happened and I had just noticed. Something tapped softly on the outside of the door, not a knock, more like fingers testing the grain. A tiny salt pop answered under the threshold. The line held. The cheap plastic skeleton on the nail turned and creaked and showed its flat, grinning face to the wood. My phone lit again, but it wasn't the unknown number. It was my brother. He sent a photo without a word. The picture was of his porch 2 states away. On his gray boards were 2 wet footprints, side by side at his threshold. The left print had a thin scar line across the arch, same place as mine. He typed, "Is this a joke? You outside?" The hair on my arms rose in one slow sweep like static. I typed back, "Stay inside. Pour salt. Don't step." He wrote, "I don't have salt." Then he wrote, "Something is breathing in the boards." I stared at the rug. Another inside print had formed near the hall table, toes toward the bedroom now. It had a dime-sized dark spot at the side of the arch, like a mole. My brother's. I felt the spot throb in memory like my foot knew where his mark sat. The doorknob turned and stopped, patient. I backed up, keeping the door in my peripheral. I spread salt across the bedroom doorway in a thin, hard line. I didn't want to scuff it with my own shoe. That thought made my stomach drop. I looked down. My socks were damp. I pulled one off. The skin of my foot was warm like I'd had it in a bath. When I set it on the dry wood by accident, a faint pale oval darkened under it before I snatched it back. My own foot could make a print now without touching water. I turned off the heat. The house cooled a little. The steam coming off the indoor prints thinned. The hiss at the salt line calmed. For one thin second I thought I had tricked it. Then a print formed halfway up the hall wall at knee height, as if a foot had set down there. Another formed higher, at shoulder height. The air smelled like wet wood and old candy, like someone had rinsed the sweet out of the house and left the rinse. Mrs. Harlan texted then, a number I didn't have saved but knew from her voice in my head. It said, "Don't say how many. Don't count them. Keep the line." He counted. "Don't." The he sat like a tiny thorn. The doorknob moved, slow and sure. until the flat of the latch kissed the striker plate and held there, humming in my hand like a muscle under skin. Outside, the porch stayed empty. No weight made the boards complain. And still, just past the threshold, another inside print rose, warm and dark, heel down first this time, like someone was walking backward away from me toward my bedroom. I threw more salt and ran to the kitchen for more, hands shaking. The bag slipped. Grains skittered. When I came back, a small crescent gap showed in the salt at the threshold, 3 inches where the line had been smeared by my own boot when I braced the door. The air that came under that tiny gap was warm. It smelled like breath held too long. I dropped to my knees and patched the line with shaking fingers. The hiss came back and the warmth faded. A wet oval had formed on the inside of the bedroom door while I was fussing, low to the floor, toes pointing out toward the hall. Under it, faint, another oval showed like a ghost of a step that had almost been taken and then thought better of it. My phone chimed again. My brother sent a video. His camera showed his porch empty, nightlight yellow, pumpkins mush-mouthed. Then, at the edge of the frame, a dark oval rose on his top step. Another formed beside it. They held steaming. His text came after the video, short and flat. "They look like yours." I stared down my hall at the prints that were starting to look like my family. Feet, like mine, like his, arranged the wrong way round. I could hear a tiny wet pop in the boards, regular as a drip. My doorbell camera pinged then, motion detected. The thumbnail showed a still image of my own porch from 1 minute ago. A person stood there in the frame just out of the cone of light, barefoot. The left foot had a pale scar across the arch. The toes were long. The heel hung over the top step like it was about to lift. The person's hand was on my knob. The chain showed at the crack. The title beneath the clip said, "Front door, you." I watched a jack-o'-lantern crawl a little closer to my door, and it wasn't the wind. It wasn't a prank string or a kid with a stick. The pumpkin shifted on its own, a slow dry scrape of rind on painted wood. And when it stopped, the carved grin pointed at my knees like it had been listening the whole time. I had carved my own pumpkin the night before, a lopsided grin with 3 big teeth and eyebrows that made it look worried. I put it on the top step with a cheap candle I could switch on with a thumb. But the one on my mat at sundown was not mine. The face was cleaner, sharper, the eyes long and mean, and the grin had too many teeth. The candle inside wasn't my switch candle either. The light in there was a steady orange like a coal, and the warm smell that came off it wasn't wax. It was sweet and sour at once, like fruit left in warm water. I told myself a neighbor swapped pumpkins as a joke. It happens. People trade things on this street like we share a junk drawer. Kids were already lined up, costumes squeaking, the air flavored with candy and smoke. I handed out chocolate with a smile and told the little witch to hold her cape out of the candle flame. The flame didn't flicker in the wind. It flared when she leaned close and then went steady again. "It smiled at me," she said, and it sounded silly until she added, "No, look," and pointed. The corners of the mouth looked pulled wider than they had a minute ago, a shine at the cut edge like the flesh had softened. I got my sidewalk chalk and drew a ring around the base because I wanted to prove to myself the scrape had been a trick of eyes. I drew it thin and even, white chalk dust on gray boards. Then I went back to the door and waited and tried not to look down. When I did look, the chalk line showed a gap. A neat half-inch of the circle had rubbed away, like the pumpkin had rolled and then adjusted itself to face me again. Warmth reached my ankles, a soft wave out of the mouth hole, and the hair on my legs lifted as if the air had fingers. Mr. Dutton from 2 doors down came by with his yappy dog and did a double take. He stopped dead at the foot of my steps. "He used to put it right there," he said, not to me, to the boards. "Every year, right there on the mat. Never let it cross." He looked up at me with eyes that had watered for years. "Don't bring it in," he said, and then shook his head and shuffled on like he hadn't meant to say anything out loud. I put a hand on the lid and felt heat move through the stem. Not candle heat, body heat. The rind under my fingers had a little give, not like rot, like a cheek under makeup. I lifted the lid and leaned down to blow. The orange inside was deeper than a candle. It looked like the color of a mouth when you hold a flashlight under your chin. I blew anyway. Warm air pushed back against my lips from inside, a soft puff that tasted faintly of sugar and sink. The light inside flared bright as if it had inhaled my breath and liked it. The carving edges glistened. A drop of warm juice slid from a tooth and ran down the grin like a little string of spit. "Cool," a kid said and reached out. I slapped my hand gently over his wrist without thinking. "No touching," I said in a voice I hated hearing, tight and sharp like my mom at a stove. The kid's face crumpled and then smoothed. His mom said thank you with her mouth but not her eyes and tugged him away. As they stepped off the mat, the pumpkin nudged itself forward the slightest bit, enough to smudge the chalk again. A text buzzed on my phone. It was from my sister, a photo from a year I didn't remember taking. My porch in the picture looked like mine except for small things. An old chair, a different doormat. On the mat sat a jack-o'-lantern with the same mean eyes and too many teeth. The caption under it said, "Why did you send this?" which would have been funny if I had sent it. I typed, "I didn't." Her typing bubbles popped up, disappeared, came back. She wrote, "Weird," and then nothing else. Between groups, the porch went quiet in that heavy way wood gets at night. I could hear the candle sound inside the pumpkin, a faint liquid crackle. Not wax. Something wetter. The smell deepened, like the inside of a fruit when you cut it and leave it in the sun. When I leaned closer, a film had formed along the inside of the mouth, a thin wet line like a lip. I tried to move it down a step. The pumpkin resisted, not with weight, though it was heavier than it should have been, but with a lazy drag that stuck to the boards. Threads of stringy pulp stretched between the rim and the wood and then snapped with soft, sticky sounds. The grin turned toward my hands as I pushed, the eyes always keeping me in their angles. I got it to the top step and it tipped, heavy and unhelpful, and then rolled once by itself and stopped halfway down as if it didn't like the cold. Two teenagers came up with no costumes, pretending not to care. One kicked the step below the pumpkin like he was testing it. "Bet it squirts," he said, and laughed. His friend knocked the rim with his knuckles. The orange inside surged. The mouth breathed warm on his hand. He jerked back and swore. "It's wet," he said, shaking his fingers. A dark thumbprint bloomed on the rind where he touched. It looked like skin pressed against skin. I picked the pumpkin up to bring it to the yard because the mat felt wrong with it there. My arms shook with the weight. The stem dug into my palm like a stubborn handle. The face swung toward me with the movement, eyes up, grin wide. The lid slid a little and warm vapor breathed up my sleeve. On the inside of the lid, in a patch of scraped rind where someone's spoon had gone too deep, were neat letters like from a rubber stamp. It said, "Do not open with door." The words looked damp. My grip slipped. The pumpkin rolled, heavy and eager, and bumped the door. The edge of the grin met the threshold and stuck. The door would not close. The mouth breathed out on my ankle, hot and sweet. The lid lifted from the inside with a slow, careful push. I pushed down with my knee. The grin stayed stuck to the threshold like a mouth to skin, strings stretching and snapping with soft sounds. Warm breath slid over my ankle in slow pulses. The lid lifted another inch from the inside, not popping up, but rising careful, as if whoever was under it wanted to see my face and was being polite about it. I read the stamp again on the underside, backwards now in my head. "Do not open with door." The house door was open a few inches because the pumpkin had wedged it there. As I shoved, the lid rose higher. When I eased off, the lid closed a little. It wasn't a warning. It was a rule. The lid was listening to my door. I grabbed a belt off the coat hook and looped it over the stem. The leather warmed fast under my fingers, a body warmth that made me want to pull away. I cinched the buckle tight, trying to tie the lid down. The stem flexed a little under the strap like a wrist. The strap went damp where it crossed the lid. It held for a second, then slid, slow as a tongue under a door. "Back up," I said to a princess waiting at the bottom step. She didn't argue. I eased the door toward the frame, inch by inch. The lid lowered with it, inch by inch. breathing on my shin the whole time. When the door touched the frame, the lid settled, then shivered like it wanted to come back up. I kicked a thin line of salt along the gap and the breath pulled away the slightest bit, like it had sniffed and decided against it. I left the door locked and went around through the kitchen. I opened the fridge because I needed the cold and to calm down. As soon as the seal broke, I heard a scrape from the porch. I froze, door half open, cold on my hands. The scrape went again, a slow drag. I closed the fridge. The scrape stopped. I opened a cabinet an inch. The scrape. I shut it. Silence, except for a faint wet crackle out front, like a candle that wasn't wax. I texted my sister. "Pumpkin is stuck to my door. Don't open yours." She wrote back fast. "Mine is on my mat too. It's warm." I told her, "Don't open any doors while it sits there." She sent a string of question marks. I typed, "Trust me." Her dots blinked and then paused. I took 2 ice packs and a bag of frozen peas and set them on the lid, one after the other. The skin of the pumpkin dulled under the cold, the orange going from gloss to matte. The breath inside slowed. The belt bit a little better into the softened stem. The lid stayed down. The inside light didn't die. It glowed like a coal buried under ash, steady. Kids came in little bursts. I passed candy through the smallest gap I could make, not with the door, but under the corner of the curtain in the hall window, the way an old neighbor used to hand out books when her hip was bad. A boy in a cape tried to peek at the pumpkin. "It moved," he said, excited like he had seen a magic trick. I said, "Nope," in a voice that made him frown and back up. The grin turned a fraction toward his breath and then slowed when the cold packs slid. Mr. Dutton came back without the dog. He stared at the belt around the stem and nodded like he had seen a thing tied that way before. "Don't let it face in," he said. "It learns faster when you let it look inside." He didn't wait for an answer. He shuffled off with his arms folded like he was holding in words. I got a metal baking sheet and pushed it under the base. The pumpkin didn't want to lift. It wanted to drag. The rim made soft sucking sounds where it stuck to the boards. Threads stretched, thin and clear, and snapped, gummy and warm. I slid the sheet a little more, like a pizza peel under a hot pie. The belt creaked. The lid shivered. The orange glow swam under the cold and held. I got the weight centered and rocked it to the top step. I had a circle of salt ready in the yard by the sidewalk, a neat ring. I set the pumpkin in it with a grunt. The breath out of the mouth touched my wrist and went shy when it hit the salt. The grin pointed toward the street. The eyes aimed at nothing. It seemed to listen to that nothing for a minute, as if it could hear a door opening far away. The glow inside stayed steady. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. It said, "Turn it outward. Keep your doors shut until dawn. Do not feed it with warm air." I typed, "Who is this?" No answer. The screen showed my own reflection, pale in the black, my mouth a thin line. I locked the phone without thinking, as if that would shut a door it knew. 10 minutes later, a teenager cut across my lawn and crouched in front of it. He had the bored, bold look kids wear when they want to feel something. He hooked a finger in the mouth cut and lifted the lip like it was a fish. The orange inside swelled and breathed on him. He jerked. "It's hot," he said to no one, and then laughed to hear himself. He slapped the lid like it was a drum. The belt held. The pumpkin rocked, breathed out in one long, soft line, and then went still, listening. The kid stood up fast and left, looking back once like he had not meant to touch it at all. I shut every door in my place. I taped the bathroom door and the closet. I closed the fridge and sat on my hands. When I forgot and opened the microwave, a scrape came from outside like a thank you. I shut it quick and stood very still. The night went thin and late. Somewhere a car door slammed and the pumpkin lid outside lifted the tiniest bit and settled. I set my jaw and did not open any more doors. Near midnight, the house made one of those old house pops, deep in the wall, the kind that always makes you peek into a room for no reason. My back bedroom door drifted open a finger's width. I had not taped that one. I didn't think about it. The scrape from the yard came, deliberate and slow, not at the mat, but closer than a ring of salt should allow. I ran to the bedroom and pushed the door shut with my hip and held it with my palm like I was blocking a person. Down the hall, a light flared at the bottom crack of the front door, steady and orange, moving across the wood like a warm breath. I waited for morning because I had nothing else to do. My sister texted at 3. Her photo showed the inside of her car, fogged. The pumpkin sat on the passenger floor, lid low, belt on the stem. She wrote, "I opened the car door to grab a sweater. It got in." I typed, "Keep every door closed. Keep it facing out. Don't let it look at you." She wrote, "It knows my name." Then, nothing. At dawn, the glow in my yard dimmed to the color of old juice. I went out. The salt circle was unbroken. The pumpkin sat in the exact center, turned toward my front door. The belt lay loose in the grass like a shed snake. The stem had a shallow notch in it where the buckle had been, a small pressed bruise. I lifted the lid with both hands. The inside was not a candle. It was a soft, warm lining like a mouth, and on the underside of the lid, where the stamp had been, the words had changed. They said, "Do not open with mouth." I put the lid back and pressed until it stuck. I shut my lips and tasted sugar that wasn't there. When I breathe near the door now, the grin tips the smallest bit like it is listening. I keep all the doors closed as best I can. The microwave, the closet, the mailbox. When I forget and open one, even an inch, I hear a scrape in the yard. It doesn't need to cross. It just needs a door. I have one I can't tape shut. In the night, when I yawn, my eyes water, and in the yard a faint orange lifts like something hearing me from under a lid. I don't know what happens if I open too wide. I am trying hard not to find out. I didn't notice the witch until I realized she wasn't blinking. She stood at the bottom of my steps with her hat too big and her dress too clean, a small black pail in both hands, and she watched me with wide, glossy eyes that never dipped or shut. Kids jostled past her, wrappers crackled, leaves stuck to tights, but she stayed planted at the exact center of my walkway, like a pushpin in a map. When I waved her up, she didn't move. When I looked back again, she was closer by one cracked line in the concrete. Her eyes were the wrong kind of shiny, not wet shiny, polished shiny, like marbles pressed into skin. Her eyelashes were too straight. The hat's ribbon cut into the top of her ear a little, and she didn't flinch. A smudge of green makeup ran along her jaw but missed her ear entirely, like someone had painted a face on something that didn't need one. I was handing out candy from a big bowl in my lap. The porch smelled like candle wax and cold leaves and the faint warm plastic smell that clings to masks. My jack-o'-lantern had slumped into a sad mouth. It breathed a little when the door opened and closed. The little witch didn't seem to feel the cold. Her tights were striped like candy, and the skin between glove and sleeve was pale as paper. She came up the first step while I turned to grab more candy. I didn't see her move. I just heard the dull tap of her shoe and felt that soft change in the air, like someone had leaned in. When I looked again, she had tilted her head like a bird. Her eyes looked wider that close. Her mouth was small and red and a little too still. "Happy Halloween," I said, because that is what you say when you are the adult on a porch. "Take one." She didn't reach. She said my name. She said it plain. No question in it, no ask. Hearing it made my mouth taste like pennies. "Do I know you?" I asked. My voice came out too careful. "You blink a lot," she said, like she was counting something about me. It wasn't mean. It was a fact. She smiled then, but her eyes stayed wide. I told her she could have 2. I shook the bowl like that would make the candy move itself into her pail. Her hands tightened on the handle and the pail didn't shift. It looked very light, the way a prop looks light when a kid holds it wrong. She took one tiny step up without lifting her feet, a glide more than a walk, and her hat slid forward without touching her hair. "Where are your parents?" I said. "They do not stop," she said, and looked past me into my house like she was reading what the night left inside. "Do you want mine?" She said it like a real offer. A group came and went, too loud, masks askew, eyes on their phones. They took candy without looking at me and ran. The witch's eyes did not flick to them. They never left my face. My own eyes started to burn in the dry air the way eyes do when you stare too long. I licked my lips and the motion made me blink without meaning to. She did not move when my lids came down. When they came up, she was a step closer. Her pail brushed my doormat. My breath made a small cloud between us that drifted and broke on her dress like fog on a fence. "Don't play with her," a woman on the sidewalk said under her breath. She had a stroller and a tired face, and the quick fear look that is not about being scared of something you can see. "Do your candy and go inside. Don't stare." She moved past fast, wheels bumping the curb. My doorbell camera sent a ping to my phone. Motion detected. The thumbnail showed my walkway from 30 seconds ago. The little witch wasn't there in the image. The space where she stood was empty and a little darker. When I tapped the clip, it played in a thin, stuttering way. The video showed kids, the bowl, my jacket sleeve. Each time my face turned toward the street, a flicker, and that dark shape in the exact place where the witch stood, as if the camera had blinked and she had used it. "Do you want to trade?" she asked. Her voice had that almost sweet edge kids get when they've rehearsed a line too many times. She lifted the pail so I could see inside. It wasn't empty. It held small things wrapped in plastic, not candy shapes. Round little ovals, glistening. They looked like the clear half of a capsule from a pill bottle. When she tilted the pail, one of the ovals rolled and stuck to the side like it had a wet edge. "No trades," I said, and my mouth hurt on the words. I swallowed and my eyes watered. "You can take 2 and go." "You blinked," she said, pleased, like I had kept a promise I had never made. I thought about stepping inside and shutting the door. The idea of turning my back made my neck feel thin. I stood up slow, bowl in hand, and the porch felt too small. The sound of the neighborhood dropped like a curtain for a second. I could hear the tiny tick of my porch light, the soft guttering of the candle. My eyes burned worse. I locked my knees and held them wide on purpose so I wouldn't sway into a blink. She lifted 2 candies with careful fingers, one at a time, like she was taking the pulse of each one. She didn't put them in her pail. She set them on the mat, very gently, side by side. They fogged a little as if they were warm from her gloves. "I collect the little closings," she said. "They always give them away." "What does that mean?" I asked. "Because you ask questions when you have nothing else." She did not answer. She pointed at my eyes with one small finger and then touched her own. The fingertip left a faint smear like collarbone powder on glass. The smear did not fade. It sat there and made her eye look even more like a marble pressed into a mask. My phone buzzed. A number I didn't know sent 3 words. It said, "Do not blink." It came again. It said, "Mirror helps." The 3rd text came from my sister. It said, "Is she at your house too?" I propped my phone against the bowl so the front camera showed my face. I watched my own eyes in the screen. It made it easier and worse. Every time the image lagged, the witch was closer in the edge of my vision. The hat brim touched my doorframe now. Her pail bumped the threshold. My eyes screamed like a muscle cramping. I tried to count to 10 like I could make a rule out of nothing. On 7, a tear broke free and slid hot. My lids dropped like a reflex and I snapped them open fast. "You blinked," she said, almost laughing. The latch on my door clicked like a tongue against a tooth. The gap at the jamb opened the smallest bit as the witch lifted her pail and pressed the rim to the seam, like putting a mouth to a straw. The inside air touched her wrist and turned to fog, and the pail fogged too, as if it was thirsty, as if it knew my house. I pushed my palm into the seam. Warm air leaked around my skin. The pail's rim kissed the gap like a cup over a straw. The inside air fogged her wrist and curled into the black of the bucket. The latch made a soft tick that felt like a finger on my tooth. "Don't," I said, and my voice sounded like it came from under the door. The witch smiled with only her mouth. Her eyes did not change. She did not blink. The hat brim brushed my frame. The ribbon pressed her ear flat and she did not flinch. The text from the unknown number sat bright on my phone where I had propped it. "Mirror helps." I grabbed it, flipped the screen black with a quick tap, and pressed the glass to the crack, right against the rim of her pail. The screen showed my face faint and my door seemed brighter. The pail breathed on the glass and fogged it, and for a split second it drank its own mouth reflected back. A thin whine came out of the gap, high and steady, like air through a straw when your thumb covers the top. The latch eased back a hair. The pail hesitated. The witch tilted her head the other way, listening to the little sound like it mattered more than me. "That's not a blink," she said, almost thoughtful. "That's a picture." She did not sound angry. She sounded like a kid making a rule. "You got your two," I said, less brave than I wanted to sound. The candies she had set on my mat sat side by side, fogged, sticky with a shine like breath dried on plastic. She lifted the pail from the seam and I felt the door sigh under my hand in relief, wood easing back into wood. She dipped the bucket toward me so I could see inside, deeper than before. The little ovals I had thought were wrappers weren't wrappers. They were thin, clear halves of something soft, stacked and stuck, each with a smear in it like the wet curve inside an eyelid. When she turned the pail, they slid with faint clicks like tongues touching teeth. "I collect the little closings," she said again, pleased to say a line she liked. "They forget to keep them." The porch went quiet for a beat in that way it does when all the small noises take a breath together. My eyes burned. My lids pulsed in time with my heart. Behind the witch on the sidewalk, a group of kids stopped, looked, and then looked away on purpose, the way people do when a dog has its head too low. "Back up," I said. My hand cramped at the seam. I could not trust my eyes long enough to step away. "Take your pail and go." She did not move. "You blinked 4 times," she said calmly, like she had counted my ribs. "You owe 4. "You can't have them," I said. It came out thin. My phone buzzed in my fist. "My sister," she wrote. "She's at my building now. She knows my name." I typed, "Mirror. Do not blink. Keep the door shut." 3 dots. Then nothing. I couldn't hold my eyes anymore. My lids trembled. I slid the phone between my face and the witch's, turned the camera on, and stared at my own stare. Watching the tiny ghost of me helped for a breath. When the image lagged, my face blinked in the screen before I did. And in that hiccup, the witch was closer, her hat brim touching the paint, the pale rim a whisper from the seam again. I pawed at the junk drawer with my free hand and found a small hand mirror, the cheap kind with a plastic frame. I wedged it tight over the gap like a patch. The pail pressed to glass. Fog bloomed and rolled back on itself. The little whine became a thin, steady squeal that made my molars ache. The latch settled, not open, not closed, like a jaw thinking about a word. She stared into her own pail reflected. Her eyes stayed wide. A tiny crack appeared in the polish of one, a hair of light like a scratch on marble. She smiled wider without blinking. "Not fair," she said softly, with no heat at all. "But fair's boring." She bent, slow and neat. She picked up the 2 sticky candies she had left on my mat. When she lifted them, they changed in her fingers. Not candies. 2 thin, clear ovals with a wet shine, warm as breath. She set them gently on my doormat again, side by side, and patted them once with a small palm. "Keep those closed," she said. "Keep them somewhere safe." "What are they?" I asked, even though my body already knew. "Yours," she said, delighted, like a teacher at show and tell. "For later." She stepped back without lifting her feet. She did not look away from me. She did not blink. At the bottom step, she turned her head in one slow bird motion and looked down the street. Somewhere a car door thumped. Somewhere a window screen knocked twice. She lifted the pail. The ovals inside slid and kissed each other. Then she was at the sidewalk. She did not walk. She was just a little farther each time I lost a second to my own burning eyes. I shoved the mirror harder into the seam and slid the chain. I shut the deadbolt with a soft click. I picked the 2 clear ovals off the mat. They were warm. They stuck to my fingers like contact lenses. When I held them up, a faint smear of lines crossed each one, little pale ridges that matched the cracks at the corners of my eyes. I put them in a dry pill bottle and snapped the lid. The bottle fogged inside as if something had breathed into it. My sister finally texted. A photo, dark and bad, her stairs, and the turn at the landing. The shot had a shadow in the corner, low and round like a hat. Her message said, "She asked if I blink for you. Do I?" Then nothing. The night thinned. Kids went home. I kept the mirror on the seam until my arm shook. When I took it away, the wood felt cool and still. The door stayed shut. The porch smelled like candle smoke and a little like dishwater. The street looked empty. The camera sent me a clip anyway. In the video, the little witch did not show. The only odd thing was me, holding up a mirror to a closed door, eyes too wide, not blinking at all. I slept on the floor by the door because I did not trust my bed. I woke with sand in my eyes and the taste of pennies. In the morning, the bottle in my pocket was warm against my thigh. When I opened it to make sure I hadn't dreamed, a wet fog kissed my fingers and slid up my wrist like a tiny breath. Both ovals lay inside, clear and patient, as if they were waiting to be used. Since then, I try not to stare at screens. I keep the mirror by the door. I carry the bottle and feel it warm when I almost blink. Sometimes I catch my reflection and my eyes look wrong for a second. Too bright, too round. Sometimes at the window at dusk, I feel a small, cool shadow touch the corner of my eye, like a fingertip reminding me to close. I do not. I hold and hold until my vision rings black. I do not know what happens if I run out of blinks she let me keep. I only know the bottle in my pocket fogs when I say my name out loud, and the latch on my door purrs once, soft as a satisfied breath. I realized we were walking in a circle only when the circle stopped behaving like a circle. You expect to see the same house again if you go around the block. You don't expect the same porch, the same candy bowl with the same missing Kit Kat, the same dog barking once and then going quiet, all lining up in the same order no matter which turn you take. I had my niece, Eva, and her friend Jalen with me. They were warm and sticky inside their costumes, breath fogging, plastic pumpkins bumping their knees. The street smelled like wet leaves, candle smoke, and cheap chocolate. Porch lights made islands in the dark. We cut down a side street to shave time because Eva's feet hurt. That was where it started. We turned left at the house with the blue porch light and the inflatable spider. 2 doors down was the yellow duplex with the cracked jack-o'-lantern that kept threatening to roll off its stool. The bowl on the 3rd porch had a handwritten sign taped to it. It said, "Take one, be honest." The candy at the top was the same mix as at the last house. I noticed because I always notice candy. We walked 2 more houses, crossed at the corner, and came up the other side. The inflatable spider was back in front of us at the exact same angle. Jalen laughed and pointed. "We went in a big, dumb circle," he said, like he had caught me out. "Fine," I said. "We'll go up 1 more and cross." I checked my phone map because that is what you do even when you know where you are. The blue dot jittered and spun. The street name at the top said Court Street, and then Clover Lane, and then Eldon, and then went blank and just said street. I tapped the screen like that would help and told myself it was bad data and a cold phone. We went past the blue light and the spider again, and my stomach did a small drop when the yellow duplex showed the same rolled pumpkin still balancing on the same stool. The bowl on the 3rd porch was back with the same note. The same top candy had its wrapper edge crimped in the same way. I knew because I had noticed the tiny bite in the plastic before. "Let's try the cut-through," I said, too bright. The cut-through is a little alley between a garage and a fence where the pavement goes thin and weeds show. It spits you out on a different street, a little closer to the school. We squeezed through in single file. The night was warmer between the fences like a mouth. It smelled like wet wood. When we stepped out, the blue porch light stared at us from across the street. The spider leaned, deflated a little more than it had been. The yellow duplex was 2 down again. "Funny," Jalen said, but no one laughed. The dog at the 4th house barked once and went quiet like someone had put a hand on its neck. Eva reached for my sleeve and didn't let go. We made a left just to do something different. Instead of the blue porch light, we got a green one and then a string of purple lights and then a house with a plastic skeleton tied to the rail that creaked when the wind did and creaked when it didn't tee. The next corner smelled like laundry and damp and something faintly sweet. When we turned, the spider sat there again, leaning toward the sidewalk like it had waited for me to stop trying. I stopped moving and the kids bumped into me. We stood in the spill of a porch light and I tried to make the world look normal. The jack-o'-lantern's cracks were the same. The bowl's note was the same. Neat schoolteacher letters, except the ink looked a little run. When I read it again, the letters had softened like someone traced them with a wet finger. Take one looked more like, take on. I licked my lips because my mouth had gone dry, and that small motion made me realize I had not felt a breeze in 5 minutes. A man in a hoodie walked past on the far side. No kids, no bag, hands in pockets. I lifted a hand because neighbors do that. He looked at me and then away too fast. "Don't go deeper," he said, not stopping. Not after 2. He did not look like he had meant to speak. He moved faster and turned a corner that put him right back in front of the spider, and he didn't look surprised when he saw it. I took a piece of chalk from my coat pocket. I always have chalk because Eva likes to draw. I drew a small arrow on the sidewalk pointing away from the spider toward the cross street. We took 5 steps, turned left, then right, then left again. The night smelled like the same candle smoke. The same white sedan with a bumper sticker about coffee sat by the curb. We stepped back into my chalk arrow. It pointed the other way now. "Maybe someone flipped it," Jalen said, "because that is what you say when you are 12 and playing brave." I knelt and touched the arrow. The chalk smear was damp, not from rain. The damp was warm on my fingertip. It smelled faintly like sugar water. My phone buzzed. An unknown number sent a text. It said, "Do not count. Keep moving. Steps are not your steps." I looked up fast. The street name on the corner was the same one I saw 2 streets over. It said Alder in flaking stick-on letters. Beneath, a painted name said Elm, thin and old. We tried trotting a block and then stopping with our backs to a fence to think. The night did that heavy quiet again. Sound pulled out of it like a plug. The kids' pumpkins thudded against their knees. Rapper noise sounded too loud. A car turned in slow from the far corner and parked in front of a house with a sagging wreath. The driver got out and looked around like people look when they don't remember putting their car there. He saw me, mouthed something like sorry, and went up his steps. He unlocked the door, went inside, and came out again a second later onto a different porch 4 houses down. He didn't look surprised then either. He sat and put his head in his hands. We made it to the end of the block by hugging yards and counting mailboxes out loud like I could lay a path with numbers. On the last yard, the land dipped a little and rose. We stepped into the next pool of light and there was the spider. The same lean, the same small hole in one leg, the same bit of duct tape. The yellow duplex sat 2 down again. The bowl on the 3rd porch had the same top candy with the crimped wrapper. Only this time the note's letters were soft enough that a drop had run and dried. It made a new line down the O in 1. It looked like a tear. I decided to be stupid on purpose. "We're going home," I said, like that was allowed. I told the kids to keep up and not stop and to grab my coat if they had to. We walked past the spider and did not look at it. We counted 15 mailboxes and then turned right, because that is what my feet said home is. We headed toward where I knew the school should be. We walked that direction for long enough that my legs got a little shaky. The houses began to repeat odd details. The same wind chimes clinked at 2 different porches. The same unlit jack-o'-lantern sat with its mouth collapsed the same way. The same ceramic bowl had the same tiny hair caught under a candy wrapper knot. I didn't touch it. At the end of the next block, the street opened up to a wide dark, with a stand of trees like a small park. I almost cried because it meant different. Then the trees made the same shape as the alley we had cut through, and the fence had the same rub marks at shoulder height. I put my hand on the wood and it was warm. We stepped through. The blue porch light breathed back at us. The spider leaned. "Look," Eva whispered and pointed up the block. 3 figures were moving away in my lane. The tallest wore a red scarf like mine, twisted one stubborn way. The smallest held their pumpkin like a shield. The middle's jacket had a rip at the hem. They were us, not mirrors, not a reflection in a store window. They were a little ahead and they were not looking back. "Don't wave," I said to the kids, as if that mattered more than anything. I watched her, the woman in the red scarf, reach up and touch her hair the way I do when I am trying to think. She slowed, and I saw her head turn. She looked over her shoulder at me, her face bright in the spill of the same porch light, and I felt the oddest thing. The soft push of breath at my cheek, like I had turned my own head, and my own breath had reached me from 2 steps ahead. I put my hand out in front of the kids like I was stopping traffic. The woman in the red scarf ahead did the same. Her hand was my hand. Her scarf twist was my stubborn twist. When she turned her head, the air pressed my cheek from the wrong direction. A soft push, like I had moved through my own breath and found it waiting. "Don't wave," I said again. "Don't say anything." They didn't. We stood there a beat too long, and the night went thin and quiet, like the sound had been pulled out. The spider leaned. The dog at the 4th house barked once and went quiet. The bowl with the note sat 3 porches down with the same tiny hair caught under the knot of a wrapper. The letters had softened more. Take One looked sleepy, almost like Take On. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. It said, "Do not pass yourselves. Keep center of street. Do not look back. Do not count." Jalen said, "Is that Mom?" His voice was too loud. I shook my head. I put my foot on the center seam of the asphalt and told them to mirror me. We walked. The 3 ahead walked. Their plastic pumpkins thumped the same rhythm as ours. A wrapper skittered across the pavement in both lanes at once and folded under a sneaker. Mine and hers. The same small crunch. I decided to try to break it. I reached up and untwisted my scarf the other way. Left over right instead of right over left. It was a tiny thing. Stupid and human. The woman ahead lifted her hand to do the same, then hesitated. The scarf on her neck stayed the old way for half a second too long. She looked down like I did when I worry. The air against my face kinked the wrong way and then let go. A cold line ran along the center seam of the street like a held breath released. "Good," the text came. "Keep center. When the light turns blue, hold your breath." "What light?" Eva whispered. "Just watch me," I said. We walked past houses that were the same and not the same. The porch with purple string lights hummed on 2 different porches, one after the other. The skeleton on the rail creaked even when the wind died. The yellow duplex waited in a way that made the hair on my arms rise. We reached the house with the blue porch light, and the spider leaned toward the walk like a listening head. I filled my lungs and held. My chest burned. My heart bumped hard against bone. The kids gripped my coat and held their breath because I was. The woman ahead did the same, a beat late. Her cheeks puffed. The kids ahead pinched noses. For 3 steps, the world slipped. The spider blurred. The smell changed from warm plastic and wax to cold damp and leaf rot. The same bowl sat on a porch to my right, not my left. The note on it was dry, the letters crisp again for a second, like someone had gone back over them with a pen that had not been dragged through breath. I let my air out slow. The kids exhaled with tiny sounds. Behind us, far or close, something else let out a breath in one long line and then caught it again, angry or disappointed, I could not tell. The 3 ahead were gone. Ava said a small "oh," like when you get a math problem right by accident and it scares you a little. Jalen laughed and then swallowed it. I kept us on the center line, hard left for a parked car, right again for a trash can. The blue light did not show again. We passed the yellow duplex, and it was only 1 story now, paint peeling, no stool for a pumpkin. The dog at the 4th house barked twice like a normal dog and went on barking because no one put a hand on its neck. "Home," I said, and I said it like a spell. We cut across the last block. The school sign sat where it should. The coffee bumper sticker car was gone. I wanted to run. I did not run. I walked like I knew the rules. Do not count. Do not look back. Keep the center. My building stood where it should, porch light yellow and small. My own jack-o'-lantern sagged into the face it always slumps into on the second night. My neighbor's purple lights hummed. My front steps had the chalk my niece had left the week before. Faded fish and a crooked sun. I almost cried when I saw the crooked sun. Then I saw the arrow. It was small white chalk pointing at my door. I had drawn one earlier in the loop, pointing away from the spider. This one looked like my chalk, my line, but reversed and damp along one edge. When I touched it, the chalk smear felt warm. Sugar hung in the air near the door, thin as a sigh. "Inside," Jalen said, reading me the way kids do when they are done with Brave. I wanted to. I put my key in my fist because that felt like being an adult. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. It said, "Do not open yet. Let them pass." "Who?" I whispered, and I already knew. The doorbell pinged my phone with a motion alert. The thumbnail showed my porch from 30 seconds ago. 3 figures moved toward my steps from the other side of the frame. The tallest wore a red scarf twisted right over left. The smallest held their pumpkin like a shield. The middle's jacket had a rip at the hem. They were tired and not running. They were keeping to the center of the walk. The title under the clip said, "Front door, you." I held the kids back with my arm. My hand shook and I made it stop. Air moved beside my cheek, warm as my own breath. At the edge of the porch light, 3 shadows crossed, layered over our shadows. The air pressed and slid like 2 crowds passing each other in a narrow hall. The chalk arrow looked wet for a second and then dried. The jack-o'-lantern ES mouth twitched in the corner like it had heard 2 sets of steps on the same boards. "Do not look," I said and stared at the dead bulb on the rail, at a chip in the paint I had been meaning to fix. The kids stared hard at their shoes. The air thinned, then thickened, then felt normal again the way old houses feel normal at dawn. The text came again. It said, "Now." I turned the key. The lock turned. The door opened to my hallway with its old runner and the smell of our shoes. It smelled like us. It smelled like home. The fan in the bathroom hummed because I always leave it on by accident. The thermostat glowed a soft number. The mirror by the door showed the 3 of us in a slice. Red scarf left over right again, because that is how my hands tie without thinking. We went in. I locked the door. I leaned my head against it and felt wood, cool and dumb, not a breath. I wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. Then, in the still, the doorknob turned the smallest bit under my palm. It didn't turn like a stranger tries a locked door. It turned like I turn it, the tiny rhythm my hand makes every night. The chain lifted 1 link and settled. The mail slot creaked open and shut very softly, as if air on the other side had pressed against it for a thought, and then decided to wait. My phone buzzed in my coat. A last text came in, no number at the top because the message showed as from me. It said, "Do not let them in if they knock like you. Let them walk. Let them go by." The clip from the camera updated itself a beat later. The thumbnail showed my porch empty. The sound with it, faint under the wind, carried a breath I knew too well, lining up with mine on the door. I am home. I am waiting. I do not know what part of me is still out there or what happens if I answer myself by name. I knew something was off with the candy right away, but I ate it anyway because that is what you do on Halloween. You dump the bag, you trade, you try the weird stuff first. We were on the living room floor with a movie on mute and a lamp turned low. My little brother Owen was still in his vampire cape and our neighbors Izzy and Marco were half out of their costumes, socks dirty from the street. The smell in the room was sugar and plastic and sweat. It felt good. It felt like being a kid. The weird candy was a bunch of pale pink squares in clear wrappers with no brand. The wrap looked hand-cut with a dull knife, edges uneven. The paper stuck to my fingers like it was damp. It smelled like strawberries and breath. I said that out loud and everyone laughed. Owen said, "It smells like hot mouth," and laughed at his own joke. I asked where we got it. Izzy said the gray house on Grafton, the one with the long porch and the lady with oven mitts on. She had a tray and said, "Try one. They are soft. I made them today." Hearing it again made my stomach shift because I remembered her smile not moving her eyes. I remembered the tray steaming like warm bread. I remembered the note taped to a pumpkin that said, "Fresh, take one." I put the pink square in my mouth. It was soft at first, like marshmallow, and then it sank against the roof of my mouth and clung there. It was warm, warmer than room temperature. It tasted good for a second, bright and fake and sweet, and then a salt metal flavor slid under it like blood from a bitten lip. I swallowed hard, and the candy did not move. It seemed to spread, like it was melting into a thin sheet. Owen made a face and tried to spit his out into his hand, but the string of it hung between his tongue and palm like melted cheese. He giggled and shook it, and the string snapped and snapped again, each break making a tiny wet sound. Marco said his teeth tingled. He said it like it was funny, and then he pressed his fingers against his jaw like it wasn't tea. I pulled at a corner of the candy with my nails and felt a tug deep in the back of my mouth. It felt connected to something down my throat. I tried water. The water made it softer, and the taste went stronger, sweet and sour and something like old milk. When I took a breath through my nose, the sugar stung my sinuses. My eyes watered. Izzy said, "Do your ears feel hot?" and lifted her hair. Her ears were pink and damp like she just came in from running. Owen licked his lips, and they shined like he had lip gloss on. He said his tongue felt numb. He kept pressing it to the roof of his mouth like a kid feeling a loose tooth. He gagged once and said he was fine and gagged again. We should have stopped then, but it felt rude to be afraid of candy. That is a dumb sentence, but it is the truth. I said it was probably gelatin and maybe it melted weird. Marco unwrapped another one and pinched it, and the square dented like skin. His fingers came away sticky and shining, not with oil, but with a thin syrup. He licked it off. He said, "It tastes like someone else already ate it," and then laughed too hard at his own joke. The bowl of pink squares sat on the table, and a wet shine grew under the plastic like it was sweating. I touched one wrapper and felt heat under the cellophane, a living warmth. The squares made a faint crackle when the room went quiet, like popping candy, except it wasn't popping. It was more like breath slipping through something soft. I got up and went to the sink. I tried to scrape the candy off with the back of a spoon. Thin threads came away, pink and clear, and clung to the spoon in fine lines. When I pulled, the thread tightened around one back tooth, and I felt a sharp needle pain as if a hair had gotten caught under my gum. I said a word I shouldn't say around kids. The taste went sudden and strong again, a rush like cough syrup. Owen said he didn't feel good. He pulled his lower lip down for me to look. His gums were bright and wet, like he chewed a hot pepper. On the gums, right above his front teeth, were two tiny pale dots like seeds pressed under the skin. When I touched them with the tip of my finger, he flinched. I swear they felt warm, the kind of warm that means alive. Izzy started coughing like she had a feather stuck in her throat. She leaned over the trash and spit strings of pink that stretched and then broke with soft snaps. Her eyes teared, and she kept saying she was fine and then coughing again until her nose bled. The blood was thin and not bright. It had a blush to it, like water used to rinse berries. My phone buzzed on the table. A post on the neighborhood group flashed on the screen. It said, "Do not eat unlabeled candy from Grafton. Kids getting sick. Check your bags." There was a blurry picture that might have been the same pink squares on a tray by a pumpkin. The caption said, "House number 51. I felt my chest go tight. I remembered the porch swing and the smell like warm sugar and dishwater. Marco stood up fast like he was going to the bathroom and then froze. He said his ear tickled inside. He turned his head and I saw a shine deep in the canal, a sheen like jelly. It moved when he swallowed. His eyes got big. He said, "I can hear it. It's making little noises." The room seemed too warm. The movie on mute showed a mouth opening. I could hear my own swallow. The bowl on the table made a small, wet click, like a tongue hitting a tooth. One of the wrappers puffed and sank as if something inside took a breath. Owen covered his mouth and looked at me with his eyes huge. He made a sound like he was trying not to cry. He opened as wide as he could to show me, and in the back of his throat, behind the soft pink spread, something moved. It moved like a tiny gill, a ripple behind the soft pink that had spread over his throat. It opened and closed with Owen's breath, a little flutter, and I could hear a faint, wet click each time like a tongue touching a tooth. I grabbed my phone and used the flashlight. The shine lit the film and turned it glassy. Under it, 2 pinholes flexed in and out, 2 small seeds breathing for him. "Breathe through your nose," I said, and he tried, and the pink in his nose swelled too. The film had crept up under his soft palate and into the sinuses. The smell that came off his breath wasn't kid candy anymore. It was hot sugar and dishwater. Izzy gagged and spit more threads into the trash. The strings snapped in soft little breaths. Marco pressed his palm to his ear. "It's popping in there," he said, voice thin. "Like little kisses." On the table, the bowl of pink squares made that wet click again. A wrapper puffed and sank in time with Owen's lungs. When I turned my head to listen, the pulses matched mine too. I dumped salt into my hand and licked my finger and dabbed the salt to the roof of my mouth. The film there wrinkled under it and pulled away a little, and a thin burn woke up along my gums. It worked for a second. Then my spit dissolved the crystals and the softness spread again, like I'd just fed it. "Dry," I said. "Keep your mouth dry." The words sounded stupid as soon as I said them. Our bodies wanted to swallow. I told them to get jackets. The word jacket felt hard and normal, and it helped. We left the bowl on the table and headed for the door. The wrappers behind us crackled like weak applause. When I opened the door, cold air rushed in and hit our faces. All 3 of them gasped, then choked, and then they spit without meaning to. Long, thin sheets slid out, pink and clear as wet skin, and collapsed in the porch light. In the cold, the sheet stiffened fast, like sugar pulled on a marble slab. Owen wiped his mouth and looked at what he had made. It lay there like a slug that had stopped. He started to cry. "It's okay," I lied. I scooped the pieces into a paper towel. They were warm in the middle and hardening at the edges, and when they touched the air coming off our mouths, they shivered like they wanted to move. I wrapped them tight. I told Marco to keep his mouth open and breathe shallow and slow. He did. His eyes watered. The pop in his ear faded to a soft crackle. Inside, the bowl thumped once, a tiny hollow sound like a throat under a lid. I did not want it in the house. I grabbed the whole bowl in a trash bag and dragged it to the driveway. The plastic bulged and sank like something inside was waiting for my breath. I tied the bag and put it in the bin and closed the lid and put a brick on the lid because that was what I could do with my hands. We stood in the cold and breathed in little sips. The film in our mouths pulled back like a tide. It didn't let go in one clean piece. It peeled in long strings and ribbons that broke and clung, and then loosened more with the cold. It made thin smiling sounds when we pulled too hard, a soft stretch noise that made my stomach roll. After a few minutes, my tongue felt like my own again. The taste left a ghost behind, a cheap strawberry sting and metal right under it. I wanted the emergency room. I wanted a bright room and a person in a coat. But Owen E.'s shoulders had stopped shaking, and Izzy S. nosebleed had dried, and Marco said the pop in his ear was gone, only a tickle. I made them open their mouths again under the porch light. The pink film was gone from the surface, but under Owen's front gums the 2 pale dots remained. When I pressed them with a dry paper towel, they pulsed once and stopped, like they were listening. In Izzy's nostril, way up, I saw a small slick shine, and it slid back when the cold hit it. We slept in the living room with the heat off and every window cracked. We dozed and woke and dozed again. Every time the air warmed from our bodies, we stepped out on the porch and let the cold take our breath and give it back. Around 3, the trash bin thumped once, a sound like someone exhaling in a box. I stacked another brick on it and sat on the step until the sky went gray. In the morning, the neighborhood group was full of posts. People said throw it away. People said rinse with salt and keep cold. Someone said the lady at 51 had moved out a month ago. Someone else said there was no 51 on Grafton. The map showed a space where the number should have been. I stopped reading because none of it made me feel better. I took the kids home and told their parents the kids had thrown up from too much candy. That lie tasted the same as the film had tasted. For 2 days, the dots on Owen's gums stayed pale. On the 3rd day, they looked like tiny blisters. He said they didn't hurt unless he drank something hot. When he did, a sweet smell came off his breath that made my teeth ache. Marco went to his doctor because his ear buzzed at night. They flushed it and said it was clear. He said he could still hear a small wet sound when he yawned. I threw the bowl away, the real bowl, the glass under the plastic. I took it to the dump because I did not want it in a bin outside my house. In the rear view, I saw a damp ring where it had sat on the passenger seat. I wiped it and the rag smelled like strawberries and sink. 2 weeks later, after school, Owen came to my room and stood with his hand closed. He looked sicker than he was. He said he felt something in his throat in class and swallowed hard, and it came up into his mouth on its own. He held his hand out and let it drop into my palm. It was a small square, wrapped in cloudy plastic, pale pink inside with a darker grain like a seed. The wrapper was wet on the inside, fogged like someone had breathed on it. On the plastic, in smeary ballpoint, was his name. "We didn't eat it," he said, in a small voice like he thought I needed to be told that. I wrapped it in 2 bags and put it in the freezer. I checked it before bed. It had a little frost on its edges and looked harder, less alive. I slept with my mouth open without meaning to, and woke from a dream of a warm kitchen and a woman with oven mitts smiling without her eyes. In the morning, the square was gone. The 2 bags were still there, tied tight, empty and fogged on the inside like someone had breathed out and breathed in again. My freezer smelled faintly of strawberries and dishwater. Owen's gum had a tiny raw spot where one of the pale dots had been. The other dot pulsed once when I looked at it and then went still, like it was waiting for heat. We are careful now. We keep the windows cracked even in cold. When the radiator ticks on, we turn it off and put on jackets. On warm nights, when the air in the house goes soft, I can hear a tiny wet click from the kitchen, like a tongue hitting a tooth. We do not accept homemade candy. We do not talk about the freezer. We breathe small. We wait. I bought the costume because it was cheap and because I didn't want to be the only adult on my street not dressed for Halloween. $30 at a church rummage sale got me a whole set in a black garbage bag, a long coat with a torn hem, a pair of soft gloves with sewn-in veins, and a big rubber mask with a pale face and a small mouth. The tag safety pin to the collar said borrowed in neat pen, not the usual size or brand info. It made me smile. It didn't make me stop. The coat smelled like old foam and basement. When I shook it out, warm air puffed from the sleeves like a breath trapped inside. It shouldn't have been warm. My apartment was cold, the kind of cold that makes the windows sweat a little. The mask's inside was damp when I put my fingers in to check the padding. My fingertips came away a little slick, like I'd touched a warm balloon. I tried it all on before the first doorbell. The coat fit better than it should have. The shoulders sat exactly where mine sit in my best jacket. The gloves slid on like hands that knew my fingers. The mask had a small mouth slit and eye holes that were a little too far apart. When I pulled it down, the rubber kissed my cheeks with a sound like suction. I could see well enough through the ovals, but the border of the world went soft. "Looks good," I told the mirror, because my voice sounded like a stranger, and I wanted to hear my own tone. The head tilt in the glass was not mine. It had a slower rhythm, like someone else nodding on a delay. I lifted my hand and the glove in the mirror lifted a beat late. It felt like a trick of vision until I turned my head too fast and the room lagged behind me like a bad video. The first knock made me jump. I was late to the door because I had to find the latch on the mask. When I pulled it off, my hair crackled along the rubber like a sweater pulled wrong in winter. A sweet, faint smell clung to my face, almost like old popcorn and wet plastic. 3 kids stared at me while I blinked. "Cool," one said, even though I wasn't wearing the mask anymore. I wondered if the eye holes had left rings. I put the mask back on for the next group because that was the whole point. From inside the costume, the porch sounded different, softer, farther. The bowl of candy looked too bright. The kids' voices came through a little slow. When I said, "Take one," the words hummed in the mask like I had spoken into a cup. A tiny band of warmth moved along my jaw that did not match my breath. A neighbor I know only as Mrs. F waved from the sidewalk and made that face people make when they are relieved. "You kept it," she said. "He always stood right there in that one." She pointed at the coat and the mask with her chin. "Fussed if anybody took two. Tradition." She said it heavy, like the word meant something more than it should. "Glad somebody kept it going." I said, "Sure," and the smile in the mask felt wrong on my lips, like smiling under tape. The zipper on the coat moved by itself a little as I reached for the bowl. It slid up a notch like a hand had tucked my throat in. The gloves warmed. I told myself it was body heat. My phone buzzed in my pocket. An unknown number. It said, "Do not wear it alone. Keep a hand with yours." The letters jittered for a second, as if the signal had run through warm water. I looked up fast at the street like someone would be there to wave. Only kids, only parents, only lights. A boy in a store-bought vampire cape stared up at my mask and took a step closer without lifting his feet. His nose touched the rubber. Warm vapor fogged the edge of the mouth slit from the outside. The fog pulled in. The slit widened a little on its own and then settled. He blinked too many times at once and backed down the steps without taking any candy. When I went into the kitchen for more chocolate, I left the mask on the table for a second. The coat hung heavy on a chair. In the flat light, the empty sleeves did not look empty. The left one had a little bend in it where an elbow would be if someone leaned. The glove rested on the table edge with 2 fingers curled under, almost polite. I picked the mask up and the table made a small sound like a jar tap. I froze because I had heard that sound in other places this week, and it always meant something was paying attention. The next knock sounded too far away and too close at the same time. I put the mask back on because the idea of meeting whatever stood there with my bare face made my skin prickle. The rubber had warmed to my cheeks. The eye holes felt closer to my eyes than before. As I opened the door, a small voice said, "You forgot the head." And I said, "What?" too loud. A little girl stood on the mat in a dark robe that looked like mine. Her version was plastic and thin, the kind you buy in a flat bag, but the shape was close. Her mask was cheaper too, and the mouth was a line like chalk. Her eyes were wide and wet and wrong. She didn't hold a pail. She held a rubber head like mine in both hands by the edges, careful as a cake. It had my same pale face, my same small mouth, my same eye holes, and it was looking at me while she held it. "I brought it back," she said. "You can't leave it open." She lifted the head toward me like a gift. Warmth moved out of it, a slow exhale through the slit. My own mask's mouth warmed in the same rhythm. The coat's zipper tugged up one more notch on its own like a satisfied breath held in. In the hall mirror, beyond the girl, I saw myself in the doorway, and I saw another me behind my eyes, hands already lifting to take the head. "Who told you to bring that?" I said, but my voice sounded like it came from the rubber. The little girl didn't answer. The head in her hands blinked, no lids, just the eye holes milking dark for a second and clearing. The coat's empty sleeve moved toward hers without my shoulder moving at all. The glove opened. It wanted to hold something. "Set it down," I said to the girl, and clamped my elbow to my ribs so the sleeve couldn't reach. The head in her hands breathed a warm, slow line. My own mask's mouth warmed in the same rhythm. The coat's zipper tugged up a notch all by itself, a little satisfied sound like a breath held in. My phone buzzed in my pocket, hard enough to make the mask hum. Unknown number. It said, "Bare hand now. Do not let both be covered. Keep a hand with yours." I bit the glove at the wrist and yanked. The inside clung like a mouth. When it let go, it did it with a soft, wet peel that made my stomach drop. My hand came out red and pruned, as if I'd soaked it too long. Faint, pale lines crossed my palm in a pattern like crazing in old glaze, the same pattern the bowl from the sale had. The air on my bare skin felt cold and real. I grabbed the mixing bowl from the dish rack with the bare hand and dumped a whole bag of ice into it. The ice squealed on metal. "Put it here," I told her. "Put it in the bowl." "You can't leave it open," she said again, voice pleased, like she liked saying the same words. She tilted the rubber head toward me as if to place it on my chest. I slid the bowl under it like a catcher, and the head settled into the ice with a soft, wet sound. Warmth bled into the cold. A thin crack ran across the pale cheek. The eye holes filmed for a second and cleared. The little mouth slit breathed a quicker breath, fog blooming and rolling back. The empty glove on my left hand reached for the bowl anyway. I slapped my bare palm flat to the glass in the door. The cold bled into my skin and anchored me. My breath fogged the glass from my side. The mask's mouth pressed heat against my cheeks, then shied from the chill like a cat from a faucet. Painter's tape sat in the junk drawer. I tore a strip with my teeth and crossed it over the mouth slit. The tape bubbled for a second and then tightened under the cold, dulling the warm line. The little girl leaned in, robes whispering. Her cheap mask did not move where her mouth should have been, but her voice came out anyway, thin and patient. "Borrowed," she said, as if reminding me of a rule on a tag. "It goes back when it is done. You can't keep it open." She wasn't talking to me, I realized. She was talking to the head. I glanced down at the coat's collar. The paper tag was still safety pinned there, borrowed in neat pen. I slid the shears through the paper and cut it free. The coat tightened at my throat like a reflex. On the underside of the tag, paler ink showed where the felt tip had bled through. 3 lines. Return with a hand. Do not wear alone. Do not let it finish dressing. A voice came from the sidewalk, quick and low. "You okay?" Mrs. F stood there with her coat open and her arms folded like she had been trying not to be part of anything. She saw my bare hand on the glass and the ice bowl and the little girl and the head. Her mouth went thin. She climbed 2 steps and reached across the gap. "Give me your hand," she said, and didn't look at the mask. I slid the chain to the first catch and put my bare hand through. Her palm was warm and dry and real. She squeezed like a nurse. "Keep me," she said, voice steady. "Don't let go." The coat tugged once like a fish on a line and then went still, as if some part of it recognized the rule written on the tag and couldn't argue with it. The empty sleeve twitched, then fell quiet, cuff heavy on my wrist like a sleepy animal. The rubber head in the ice hissed in a small, unhappy way. A vein of frost laced across its temple. The mouth slit worked against the tape. It breathed in its own cold and the breath stuttered. The little girl frowned for the first time. Her wide eyes didn't blink. "Not fair," she said softly, like she was disappointed in me as a host. "Borrowing is fairness." "Who told you to bring it?" I asked. My voice had my own tone again for a breath. She tilted her head. For a second the hat slid and showed skin beneath that wasn't skin. Just smooth, pale, warm plastic like the inside of a mask. "You did," she said. "You always do." Something tapped from inside the bowl, polite, a nail on glass. Once, again. The head breathed and fog bloomed under the tape and slipped away. The crack across the cheek whitened. The ice in the bowl made that tiny singing sound cold makes. My phone chimed. A new text, not unknown this time. My own name at the top. It said, "Do not answer the door if I knock. Bring it back when the street is empty." The letters wavered for a second, like someone was reading them through warm air. "I can walk this to the church," Mrs. F said, reading everything on my face and none of the text. "You keep your hand on me and your hand on yourself. We make a chain." That's how he did it. He made me stand right where I am, and I thought he was crazy until I saw what his sleeves did. The little girl took her hands off the bowl. Her fingers had little ridges in the gloves like sewn-in veins, like mine. She stepped back 1 stair without lifting her feet. The pail at her side hung limp and too light. She did not blink. "I'll come back when it's open," she said, like a promise and not a threat. We moved together, awkward as dancers who hadn't practiced. My bare hand in Mrs. F's, my other on the coat at my chest, the bowl against my ribs, the head breathing its faint, cold breath through the tape. The night felt thinner than it had. Sound loud in strange places and quiet in others. The street had that late-hour taste, metal and ash. My door closed behind us with a soft, satisfied click. Halfway down the walk, my doorbell camera pinged my phone. Motion detected. The thumbnail was dark. I tapped it out of habit and watched the clipped world show my doorway from a minute in the future. In the clip, I opened my own door. I wore the coat zipped to the throat and both gloves. The mask tilted the way it had wanted to tilt. The little girl held the head out to me, and I took it in both hands like I had always meant to. The title under the video said, "Front Door. You." My fingers tightened on the cold bowl. Mrs. F.A.'s grip crushed down on mine like she was trying to keep me from falling into something I couldn't see. On the screen, the other me turned toward the hall mirror, and the head in his hands breathed a warm fog along the glass as if testing its own fit. The clip ended right before the mouth touched the mouth. The sleeve on my left arm twitched then, a small, eager flinch, like a hand learning a habit it hadn't finished yet. The tape on the rubber mouth bubbled once and settled. The head tapped the bowl again, gentle and polite, like a borrower at a door it knows you will open sooner or later. I'm walking with it now, the chain of hands keeping me where I am. I do not know which me makes it to the church and which one waits at my own door. Patient, borrowed, ready to be returned. I was the last porch light on our street, and I only realized it when the quiet got wrong. The night had thinned to that hour when the air feels hollow and the candy smell turns sick. One by one, the yellow islands went dark, a block of little suns swallowing themselves. Kids had gone home, parents had posted their last photos, and the wind picked up in small, careful pushes. My light stayed on because my sister said she might swing by late with my nephew to show me his costume. It felt rude to flip the switch. I stood in the doorway with the bowl on my hip and watched the street choose to be empty. The leaves along the curb made that dry whisper sound like things speaking under their breath. A moth hit my fixture and stuck, wings beating a soft apology. The glass globe around the bulb had a fog inside it, a thin film that hadn't been there at 6. The hum sounded different too. It wasn't the clean buzz of a cheap bulb. It was a throat sound, low and steady, like someone humming under a blanket. Mr. Riley 3 doors down had told me once, with a finger on his nose like we were trading secrets, never be the last porch light. He said it was a silly rule until the year it was true. He didn't explain. He had that old man way of making warnings sound like gossip. I laughed then, and I want to go back and shake myself for laughing. At 10, our neighborhood group pinged my phone. Someone wrote, "Lights off by 10, please." Someone else wrote, "There was a guy in a long coat following kids earlier." A third wrote, "Whoever is on Alder near the church, please turn your light off. It's drawing." The word drawing stuck like a pit in my throat. Drawing what? I stuck my head out and looked both ways because I am not brave, just the kind of person who pretends to be polite to fear. Every house had gone dark except a porch at the far end where a blue bulb glowed weak, and a light at the corner where Mrs. Harlan always leaves hers on for her cat. Mine sat in the middle like a target on a map. I went to the switch in the hall. It was in the usual place. It was the usual size. When I flipped it, the hum did not stop. The light did not dim. The switch flipped down and drifted up again, not fast, not a spring, a patient return like a breath you cannot hold forever. I did it twice more because doing it again is what you do when the world says no. The same soft slide, the same hum. I took a step out onto the mat. The night felt warmer near the glass. A slow heat rolled down the siding and touched my wrist. I reached up and pressed a fingertip to the globe. It was not burn hot. It was body warm. Through the fogged glass, moth wings shadowed the light in slow pulses. I could see the shape of the bulb inside as a blurred bright. Something moved across it in a soft curve, like a fish turning behind frosted glass. It smelled like candy left in a sink and a little like old fruit. The smell wove around the usual leaf and wax and left a taste in my mouth like a kiss I did not choose. The moth stuck to the glass stopped beating for a second, and then thumped again, slower, as if the air inside the globe had thickened. Condensation rolled in a thin drip. It traced a shape on the inside of the globe and stopped. The shape looked like a 1. Then the drip smudged and made it look like an open mouth. 2 kids came out of the dark like a trick, small and late, no adults. They wore simple clothes, hoodies, and cheap plastic fangs. They stood on the bottom step and lifted their faces into my light as if they had been waiting for it. "You're still open." the shorter one said. He said it like he was hungry. "We're closing," I said, and I tried to keep my voice gentle. "Last call." He squinted like the light hurt his eyes. "It's the last," he said, not to me, to the air. His friend nodded without stopping the nod, a slow yes like a rocking chair. Neither kid had a bag. Neither kid reached for the bowl. Their breath made no clouds. "I can't give you candy without a bag," I said. It was a stupid sentence to be proud of. The shorter one lifted his hand and held his palm out and up like he was waiting to feel rain. The light's hum changed then, a little higher, a little happy. Warmth gathered in the globe. The ball brightened in a slow swell, and the fog on the inside slid like a living thing. The moths dropped to the bottom like coins sinking in syrup. When the warmth hit his palm, he smiled. "It likes this one," he said softly. "It will finish here." I took a step back and the bowl slid against my hip. The boy with the slow nod stopped nodding. He whispered, "Do you want us to turn it off?" He did not have the lilt of a question. "Yes," I said, and my voice scraped my throat. They both looked up at the globe the way you look at the ceiling in a church. The shorter one reached toward it and did not touch it. He lifted his hand until it hovered an inch away and held it there, like you test a stove. The hum rose, the warmth in the light swelled. It felt like someone breathing deep to blow out a candle, only the breath went the wrong way, in instead of out. The glass fog streaked in a new pattern. This one looked like a number 2. A tiny crack ticked across the edge of the globe, polite as a tap on a jar. "Wait," I said stupidly because I did not know what comes after 2. Behind me, the hall dimmed for a blink, as if the light was pulling the brightness out of the house. The switch in the wall clicked by itself like a tongue against a tooth. The globe gave a small, pleased shiver. The shorter boy closed his eyes and smiled. The nodder tilted his head as if listening to a far voice, and then he said in my nephew's exact tone, "Auntie, we're here." The last thing I saw before the light changed was the moths at the bottom of the globe turning over in the warmth like things that had learned how to breathe where they should not. The hum deepened. The crack ran. The globe flexed in a way glass should not flex, and a warm sigh slid over my face as the glow went from yellow to a deeper orange, the color of a mouth lit from inside. The shorter boy said, "3," in a happy little voice. Warm air slid over my face like a sigh with weight. The globe flexed again, not glass anymore, not entirely. The fog inside it ran into a soft curve that looked like a tongue. The switch behind me clicked itself down and drifted up like a breath you cannot hold. The hall dimmed for a blink and the light on the porch pulled that brightness into itself like it had rights to it. "Hold your breath," the shorter boy said, almost kindly, "if you want to keep it." The nodder turned his head slow and used my nephew's tone. "Auntie," he said, soft as a hand on a doorknob. "It's okay. Open." I put my palm over my mouth and felt my own lips pulse against my skin. I wrapped my scarf up over my nose, tight, the wool dampening my breath. The heat from the globe pushed at the air in little waves. The moths at the bottom turned again, slow and sure, like they were learning a rhythm. I reached up. The metal ring that held the globe should have been cold. It was warm, like a wrist. The tiny screws looked like regular hardware, but when I touched one, it turned under my fingers without biting. A slow, indulgent slip like I was unscrewing skin. The globe gave a soft sound, like a jar tapped with a nail. The orange inside brightened and moved closer to the side where my hand was. A text buzzed. "Unknown number." It said, "Water and metal. Do not blow. Do not count." I left the screws half-turned and ran for the kitchen. My legs felt soft. The hall looked too long and then too short. I grabbed the biggest stainless bowl I had, filled it with water from the tap, dumped ice in until it squealed, and carried it to the door sloshing. The hum rose and settled like it could smell what I was bringing. "Don't spill it," the shorter boy said, almost amused. "It will drink that too." I stood on the mat and lifted the bowl like an offering. The heat from the globe reached for it. I tilted the water up and the surface dimpled toward the light. The glass fogged and the orange drew back like a cat from a bath. I held the bowl higher and the warmth crawled into the metal instead. The water went warm at the top and cold at the bottom and made a thin singing sound. The moths stilled. The nodder frowned for the first time. "That isn't fair," he said, without anger, just a rule broken. The porch light flexed again against the ring, eager. A hairline crack ran across the underside and froze white where the cold kissed it. In the mark in the fog, a shape formed that wasn't a number this time. It was a small, open circle, like a mouth making an O. "Back," I said, to the kids and to the light, like either would listen. I worked the ring with my fingertips, turning the screws farther. The metal slid against my skin, soft as wet wood. The ring came loose. The globe sagged into my palms with a heavy living weight that wasn't gravity. Something like a soft filament held it in place, a warm cord the color of the glow. It lowered as far as my hands, stopped, and leaned toward my face like a lantern taught to kiss. The shorter boy smiled. "Last one is yours," he said. I shoved the bowl of ice water between my face and the globe. The warm cord bumped the rim and slipped along it, searching. I dunked the lip of the globe into the water. The orange flared and then thinned. The filament tightened, then shivered. Tiny cracks ran like frost across the globe skin. The hum went to a thin whine that shook my teeth. I did not blow. I held my breath like the text said and counted nothing. The globe breathed against the water. Warmth bled into cold, into metal, into my hands. The moths inside stopped. The shape of the O tightened and went small. The filament softened. It let go like a tongue letting go of glass. The globe settled into the bowl. The orange dulled to the color of old fruit. The hum stayed, but it sounded like it came from the fixture now, not the globe. It sounded disappointed. The nodder tilted his head again like he was listening to a far porch. "It will finish anyway," he said, but softer. "It keeps the last breath." He turned his empty hands out and looked at his palms like he expected them to be wet. "Take it," I said, hearing my own voice from far away. I pushed the bowl toward them. "If you want it off, take it. Take it to the coldest place you can find." The shorter boy leaned down and touched the side of the globe with 2 fingers. He flinched and grinned, the first real childlike thing he had done. They lifted the bowl together, slow and careful, the way you carry soup. The porch light's empty fixture above us purred once like something almost pleased. The boys stepped backward down the stairs without turning. They did not have a bag, but they had the bowl and the dim, warm thing in it, and they liked the weight. "Do not open the door," the shorter one said. "Not to me, to the house. If it knocks like you." They went into the dark. They did not vanish like magic. They walked away until the sound of water in a metal bowl was just a small moving note and then nothing. My porch cooled. The air lost its sugar taste. The moths at the base of the fixture lay still like damp paper. I shut the door. The switch sat up like a stubborn chin. I flipped it down and it stayed. The hall got its normal color back. I laughed once and it cracked in the middle. I texted my sister. I wrote, "Don't come, lights are weird." She wrote back fast. She wrote, "We are outside, open." My stomach went hard. The doorbell camera pinged my phone with motion. The thumbnail showed my porch empty, light off, bowl gone. The sound in the clip, faint under the wind, carried a breath that lined up with mine. I did not play it. The mail slot lifted a hair and shut with a polite click. The doorknob turned the smallest bit, exactly the way my hand turns it when my hands are full. My sister texted again. She wrote, "Do you hear me?" She wrote, "Auntie." She wrote my nephew's name. I stood with my hand on the lock and felt the wood cool and dumb under my palm like a door can be when it does not know you are there. I waited 10 minutes. I waited 20. The phone buzzed once more. Unknown number. It said, "Last porch light moves inside when you keep it." It said, "Check your lamps." It said, "Keep a window open." I went room to room. Every lamp I had was off. The fridge hummed its sad little hum. When I opened it, the bulb glowed a deeper orange for a heartbeat and then went white again. My bathroom nightlight, a cheap plug-in moon, flickered once in a warm way and settled. In the hall mirror, when I leaned close, I saw my mouth faintly lit from behind my teeth like I'd held a flashlight under my chin as a kid. It faded when I breathed out and brightened when I breathed in. I slept on the couch with the window cracked and a bowl of ice on the table because doing anything feels safer than doing nothing. Around 3, something breathed at the door, polite as a hand raised high in class. The knob turned in my rhythm and stopped. The mail slot lifted and shut once like a nod. I did not open. In the morning, my porch bulb looked normal under its clean glass. My sister texted me a picture of her porch from the night before. It showed nothing but dark. The message with it said, "We didn't come by. We fell asleep early. Sorry." Now when I yawn, the room warms a little. When I talk, my lamps hum in a thin way that makes moths come to the shades. I am careful not to be the last light on my street. I'm careful not to let anyone use my voice through a door. Some nights I wake because the hall has gone orange for a breath and the switch has clicked by itself and drifted back, polite as a habit. I keep a bowl of ice by the window. I keep the window open. I do not say my name out loud at the door anymore. With the light off, the last porch light is still on somewhere, and sometimes I can feel it count in the warm at the back of my mouth. 1, 2, I do not wait for 3.